Microphone mode. The microphone mode. Okay, excellent.
Vivian, can you hear me? I'm just texting my phone. I couldn't use computer audio for some reason, so I had to hook up through my phone for let me get my video going. Yeah, sorry about that. You can hear me okay?
Yeah,
okay,
I can hear you, Steve.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
And if you hear us?
Yes, Heather, I can hear you.
Thank you. I wanted to make sure I was like the owl and technical thing this morning. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no.
You know Tom.
Oh, yeah. Well, I agree. I don't think.
And it's done to us on Sunday, they said 50-mile-an-hour wind, all that stuff is. I live in the city, so I can just
The
blow.
problem is then you're gonna go home much more.
It's really heavy.
But we have a police drive down.
Yeah.
Up there in the forest.
The whole 100.
They're doing flying around on the Berkshire Road. Who's
Good
morning.
Good morning.
Right away to his kid. But he's interpreting it for years.
I am walking the ball, I used to bring
I'm trying to share.
Did you get the one that I sent?
I did, and I printed it out just in time. It does take me though like half an hour to print stuff out.
I didn't realize I hadn't sent you that. I'd even forgotten I'd written it,
Yeah,
because I think I wrote it a while ago.
yeah.
And then I went to bring my documents up this morning just to print out a copy of the ones I'd
You
sent
can
you.
work
so
on
I'd
that
have
section
them.
of road if you want.
And my recent documents, what's this one?
Yeah.
And I opened it up, found there wasn't any PDF version of it, which meant I'd never sent it to you. I'm glad I got it.
Yeah, well, it's good.
I'm glad you
I
had
do
that.
have to say though, I do need at least I need an hour before a meeting to print something out though. I was surprised with the photocopier a bit, and it wasn't even that much, but to photocopy just those two things, I was like, all right.
I'm just blown away that we're able to get them out of there. This is gonna never end a couple of weeks.
I'm sorry. I hope it gets better.
Well,
Whatever it takes to get
ready. My daughter just had surgery.
Yeah,
so I
She's out of commission, which means that I'm
They're
trying to
like decided.
put out two different places,
Working with this
55 miles apart.
And
Oh,
I
okay.
think some of that stuff is.
Not run.
Yeah.
Like go back.
What are you gonna do?
I wonder if,
Just power through it.
just do the next thing and hope that the things that fall through the cracks aren't the critical.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right, good morning, everyone.
And then we should talk.
It's about a couple minutes after 9, so we should probably get started. We have a full agenda and then some today.
Or dog.
He thought it was beer.
No.
Okay, good. Not good.
For those of you who are joining online, I'm sorry we can't provide snacks virtually, but sorry. Good morning, everyone, and Heather, if we could call the meeting to order.
Sure. Chris McKay.
Here.
Brian Bronson.
Here.
Peter Coughlin.
Here.
Vivian McHale.
Here.
Rebecca Graham is out. Carla Black.
Here.
Jim Katsiafikis.
Here.
Steve Young.
Here.
Brian, I believe, told me he was gonna be out. John Monk. I think he's out.
Brian Bronson?
Ryan Pelletier.
Brian, okay. I'm looking at this face right there and it's.
No, he's there. I see him.
Can we change the face on this, please?
Yes,
Thank you,
I
Brian.
I could change the view.
Oh, sure.
How's that?
Looking at Brian first thing in the morning is not good.
Okay, I'll fix that in a second. Roberta Manter
Here.
and Catherine Nadeau. Nadeau. Nado.
Just Nado.
Nado.
Just look at it that way.
I'm gonna get it, I
Put
promise.
an accent mark over the net.
Yeah.
But
that's what
also,
it is.
it also
Thank
depends
you.
where in New England you
Oh,
are.
absolutely. Lewiston is totally different.
Right. Neto, and then it's NATO in
NATO,
New Hampshire,
yeah.
so
Yeah, it's all over.
and you ought to
the
hear
place.
what Catherine Davis thinks about that.
Yeah, well.
And John
Yes.
Monk is here.
All right, so we'll call this meeting of the Abandoned and Discontinued Roads Commission to order.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us. It's 9 a.m. For those of us here, we have some coffee to keep us going, and I think we have the room till at least noon, and I think by noon we'll probably be tired of this, but if we have to, we can stay till 1, and the idea here is to try to make some headway on the draft, and then on the particular issues that we have in our so-called parking lot, which would be private way and public easement. So with that, first off would be minutes. We have draft minutes from our last meeting in November. And I understand there's one correction John had with regard to a date in the minutes. And anyone else have any other comments or suggestions or changes?
There were a few corrections that I got. There's the date. Page 2, paragraph 2. Did we decide not to add the definition of public way in the billboard law?
I think we decided to. Let's see. Regard to that particular issue, whatever we did is in the report draft, and we decided to leave that there, the definition of public way in the billboard law. Because it's limited only to that particular section of the law. I believe that's where we wound up.
And I thought what we did was we put it just in the law itself and not as a separate definition, or make things a different.
It's in the, well, okay, it's in the law itself as a definition under 1903. And it's just for that chapter, so we thought we would leave that alone, just like we would leave the separate definitions of public way in titles 25, 34A and 34B. Otherwise, the term, well, there's a term in title 29A, and we'd leave that there as well.
And, bottom of page 4, paragraph 1, it says section 3021, that should be section 1903.
What were you saying, Roberta? I'm sorry.
Bottom of page 4, paragraph 1. It says section 3021, and that should be section 1903.
1903.
Which document are you looking at?
The minutes on page 4.
Yeah, we're looking at the draft minutes for the meeting.
Okay.
Any other changes to those?
There are a couple of other
You
things.
had sent me a list. I'll go through them and fix them. I promise.
Yeah. Like those are the critical ones.
Okay, is there a motion to adopt the minutes with those changes?
So moved.
Second? All in favor?
Vivian has her hand raised. Steve has his hand raised. Brian, are you okay with the changes?
Yes.
Okay, any objections? And they are adopted. We're not going to do a roll call vote for a hybrid meeting on minutes. We'll wait till substance.
Could I say something before we kind of delve into the meeting?
Sure.
I just want to tell everybody here, you don't know how grateful I am to all of you for being willing to serve on this commission. It means a whole lot to me. The fact that you all show up, that you all listen, you contribute your thoughts on things. We don't always agree, but that's fine. And I don't think you realize how much I have invested in this. Just kind of to give you an idea, how many of you, either you or your spouse, had to spend 6 hours plowing a public road so that you could get here today? How many of you took 2 weeks of your income, combined income, family, and put it into gravel on the road this fall so that you could be here today? Think about half a mile from your house. What if you had had to walk that half mile on a public road? and call a taxi so you could get here today because you couldn't follow that half mile. That's what we're looking at. And you know, how many of you, every morning when you walk out your door, you're looking right at what we're talking about today? You can't go anywhere without traveling over what we're talking about. That's how much we have invested. And as I said, I'm just blown away that the rest of you show up every meeting, you know, unless there's something where you absolutely can't be here. You're all here working to try to solve this problem. And I just want you to know how much I appreciate that. And I may argue with you, I may disagree with you, but I appreciate that you're here.
Thank you, Roberta.
Thank you.
And thank all of you for taking part in this. Yes, we've approved the minutes, we've called the meeting to order. There's a big task in front of us. We have a report due January of 2024. And so Heather put together a format for the report. And then I worked over the weekend to try to get a report text together to drop in there. I hope I got successfully what we all agreed to in it, but I think let's start there. You know, do we have some agreement on what's in this draft report so far? We have not touched the issues of private way. There's just a little bit it mentioned in there in public way and public easement. We haven't really gone there yet. That was in the parking lot to be discussed today. But we have discussed public way, private road, public roadway, and so I've put that in here. Are there things that need to be changed in the draft report to reflect what we've done on those issues so far? I know there's a lot to throw at you, at all of us, getting that out there Monday, but if you've had a chance to look at it, are there any particular issues that you've seen that you say, well, that's not quite what we did, or I don't quite agree, or?
The only thing I would like to say is I'm still a little bit confused and definitely concerned about the private road, because the most recent comments that came from Roberta this morning give me the impression that what we're trying to do will actually impact private roads that weren't discontinued roads. In other words, like Weyerhaeuser roads, AFM roads, Wagner roads, truly private roads, and potentially it would shut down our trail system because of it. And so I'm very concerned about the fact that we now have this private road definition, which seems to be taking away from some of what we started with originally. And so this obviously, just for the record, we'll have to, whatever we end up coming out with today has to be reviewed by the administration, by my commissioner and director and everybody else before we can officially support it. I don't know where other agencies stand, but that's the direction I've been given. But this is one of the concerns that people have that are looking at this, is they think we've left the discontinued road status and we seem to be dealing with ATV access routes and private roads that are truly private roads on private landowners and somehow going to impact them, which we can't do.
All right. I think it's fair to say that everyone's going to be checking in with their organizations. And it's fair to say too, that all we're doing is proposing legislation with this report. It will go to the state and local government committee in the form of an LD at some point, perhaps. And there will be public hearings, there will be work sessions, and I think everybody's organization will be there to weigh in on it. The idea here is to try to get together the best draft we can to provide some assistance for state and local government and for the committee assistant as background. So duly noted, and I don't think anyone here is trying to take away road rights, whether it's from loggers or ATV operators or people who live along public easements, or no one's trying to take it away. We're trying to clarify what the terms mean so that we're not talking past each other.
Yeah, I don't think we're taking anything away from private roads. I hope we're not. to me, a private road is a privately owned road, and the owners of the road, whether it's, you know, an individual or a group or whatever, they should be the ones that have say over what happens with that road. The ones that are the problem are the ones that are treated like a private road, and yet they're still open to the public. And the public gets to use them, that doesn't contribute to maintenance. That's where the problem is. Private roads, because the public is not using it, then the private interests can maintain that road and can use that road and can control that road. And I think the definition that you had proposed for private road reflects that it's a road that's privately owned.
I do think there is a slippery slope a little bit because I know that Roberta, you had put in, there was something about abutters having the right to ride wheelers and snowmobiles on the road system. We have a case right now on the Brochu Road in the West Forks, where there's a landowner up there that he owns 100 yards that abuts the Brochu Road. He's saying he has a right of way to his place, which he does on motor vehicle. He's interpreting that is a right of way from the West Forks all the way to Greenville on an ATV. And the judge ruled that the landowner would have to say there's no right to do that. Unfortunately, AFM, American Forest Management, is the manager of the land for John Malone, who's one of the largest landowners in the state of Maine. And the judge ruled that the landowner should have come in there, not the agent of the landowner. So from our perspective, we have a little bit of concern that abutting landowners are allowed to ride wheelers or snowmobiles on private roads from West Forks to Greenville, because that's not the intent of it. The intent is it's by motor vehicle, and the easement actually says that the logging company can close it down for safety issues. So they're saying that ATVs are a safety hazard due to logging.
Yeah.
But we're kind of like going down like where I think you had in there that abutters are allowed to use wheelers and snowmobiles on it.
So my proposal was that this is something we should consider, that the owners should be able to decide whether abutters can use it. I don't think I said blanket that abutters can use it. I think I said that the owners of the road should be able to decide one way or the other.
But I guess in that circumstance, it's like 40 camp owners in there. So 40 camp owners went up against one logging company. Is that gonna be fair? They own the logging company owns the road,
If the logging company is the owner of the road, then I would think the logging company
but
would be
they
the
have
one that
easement through
controls it.
there. And they're also an abutting landowner.
Mm. Yeah, it's not an easy situation, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And the thing of it is, this wasn't and isn't a discontinued town road, so I don't think it should even be part of our topic.
Right.
But unfortunately, we've delved into several other areas, and I think that's what's given everybody that's now just starting to look at this concern.
Okay, and the reason we're delving into it, to be clear, is because the legislature asked us to. They asked us to take a look at particular terms: private road, private way, and public easement, and get back to them. And that's where we started getting into the
Kind of a question I do have with that in regards to that, Jim, would there be a benefit to having like and I'm not saying this is where we would want to go with this, but a commercial private road instead of a residential? Like say a camp road is residential camp road versus warehouse or owning commercial logging road. I mean, there's camps on those roads, but they're also not considered. I mean, I don't know if I'm just throwing it out there.
Do the logging companies want their own classification?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, that would be.
I don't know.
Beyond what I would have any knowledge of, but I'm just saying there is a difference.
Well, what would we consider a logging road? It's privately owned.
Yep.
And it's controlled by that private company, that owner. So that owner can restrict access, passage, and handles maintenance.
I do know that there are some exceptions, both in Title 23, Section 3101, the road association laws. There's an exception for logging company roads. And in which one was it? 3121, the new one about the owners of road sharing and maintenance, that one is an exception for logging company roads. So we wouldn't be off base if we said that that's a separate category.
Well, right now, and you're right, they are accepted. You can form a road association. If you have 4 or more landowners of residences on a road, you can form a road association. There could be others, and they have to belong, they get assessments. And that way you can maintain, pay whatever, keep that road in decent shape. The exception to that is that it doesn't apply to private roads, private ways or bridges, constructed or primarily used for commercial or forest management purposes. So they're already out of that. So if you have 4 camp owners on a woods road, a forest management road on Weyerhaeuser's property, they can't form a road association. And that's just, they have their leases with the paper, with the forest company, and that's the end of the road, so to speak. Otherwise, you could have this, so I don't think that gets us in trouble.
So one thing I'm just, like from what you're saying, so should it be mandatory that if there's, that they have to have a road association?
No. I mean, they have their leases and they have their rights and they maintain. I don't think anyone's got a problem, or anyone has a problem with the forest products roads.
Oh, no, I'm saying like, I'm saying camp roads,
for camp
or
roads.
like, should it be that they have to have a road association?
I
Why
would
not?
say no.
No, it's voluntary.
There are some cases where, say there are 3 or 4 people who get along fine, they all contribute to road maintenance. And there's one guy, maybe who was there first before any of the rest of them moved in, who say absolutely not, he doesn't want any part of a road association. And sometimes what works best is for the other people to say, fine, he was here first, he's got his right to say that, we'll just maintain the road and not require that he be a member.
But wouldn't that solve some of your problem with like having to maintain it yourself, that you have to have a road association, so everybody has to contribute that actually has access to the road?
Good question, and that's because there are 2 different types of roads.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
we were talking about road associations on private roads.
Right.
Privately owned. People have an easement to use it. They have their house on the private road. What Roberta's instance is a public easement where there is a road. The road is perhaps owned by the abutters to the center line. But because the town discontinued it, or it's statutorily abandoned, or because it once was a private way that was laid out for cultivated lands to get their crops to town, it's now a public easement. So the public has a right, but not the obligation to maintain. The public exercises that right by a vote. Town meeting or town council can vote whether to maintain that road and what level. Is it going to be year round? Is it going to be just summer maintenance grading? Is it going to be summer and winter? That's subject to town vote. And if the town says no, then the private owners have to do that. Now, the private owners can do that individually, or I think they can use the road association. They may not like that. And that's kind of a weird situation when you think about it, because you're responding to whether a town in any given year appropriates money to repair or maintain that road. If you form a road association, it's ongoing. It's not just for a year. And so that's the problem with public easements.
Well,
in part.
There's a little more to it than that,
Well,
because I don't know of any town that votes every year on whether or not they're going to maintain their public easements.
I do, but-
We've been, well, I'd like to know which towns do.
Okay,
Because in Fayette, my husband has been there for 52 years now. I've been there for 42 years. And I can count on one hand the number of times that it's come before the town as to whether or not they would maintain our road. In fact, I wouldn't even use my thumb. I think it's only been 3 times. And the reason it was on the warrant was because we went out and got signatures to get them to put it on the warrant. And if we hadn't done that, it wouldn't have been addressed at all.
Yeah.
And they voted no every time. And that's the experience of most of these people that I represent across the state, is that if they want the town to even look at it, they have to get the signatures, they have to get up a petition, get it on the warrant. And then because the other people in town, most of them don't use the road, there's a few hunters who do, there's a few snowmobilers who do, and they want it kept open. But there aren't enough of them to say, yes, it's worth putting our tax dollars into maintaining this road that the rest of us never use, so they vote no. and you're back where you started.
So at least having the option of forming a road association is helpful in that instance to spread the pain.
An informal road association can work, but I don't think it's constitutional to have a statutory road association on what is still a public road, because then you are mandating that someone who doesn't own the road, that it's a public road, that they take their private funds and put it into this public road to maintain it.
Okay.
And that's a taking of private property for public use with no compensation.
And this is a lead-in to our discussion on private ways and public easement, because this discussion that Roberta and I are having goes to this. There is a statute. There are 5 statutes on road associations. And once upon a time, it said private ways. Well, private way is the antiquated term for what we now know as a public easement. It says public right of way. What they really were regulating is the ability to have a road association for a private road. So it shouldn't say private ways, it should say private roads. But it was amended in about 2007 or so to cover both private ways and private roads. So meaning maybe public easements and private roads. So should there be an ability to form a road association on a public easement that is not maintained by the town? And I would say yes, because it helps to spread the pain among the road owners. But I think Roberta would rather, has objections to that. And I understand and appreciate it. I don't. Well,
I think the Constitution has
To your
objections.
point, it's, you do it anyway.
What's that?
You're putting your money into the road anyway, and not an association.
But the difference is, do we have a right to force our neighbor to put money into the road when it's not his road, when it's still open to the public? It's one thing to say, would you be willing to donate? That's fine. But to say you have to, and if you don't, we're going to file a notice of claim against your property. I don't think the Constitution allows.
well, where
Well,
the town,
what-
right? Go ahead, Brian.
Wouldn't it be, couldn't you look at it like taxes though? I mean, we have to pay, as taxes, we have to pay into the roads anyway, right? Don't we? I mean, so that's constitutional, isn't it?
Well, the problem is that we're already paying taxes and none of that tax money is going back into the road. So then we're having to pay a separate tax. Just the people on the road are having to pay a separate tax on top of their taxes to maintain a road which the public uses. If the public is going to use it, shouldn't the public be contributing at least enough to support that public use?
The other side of it,
That's what we've been saying, is that maybe they don't
Yeah.
have to keep full town road standard. But if they're using it, say, as a snowmobile trail or an ATV trail or for hunters, shouldn't the town at least contribute enough money so that the public's use doesn't destroy the private uses of the landowners who need that for access?
the other side of the coin on that is that the town has the right under state law, but not the obligation to maintain that way to whatever level it decides. And that's subject to an annual town meeting vote, which happens in some towns, but apparently not in Fayette.
Not in most of them that I'm aware of.
Okay, all right, but the other part of it is, if that public easement didn't exist, some people may not be able to get to their properties because they don't have a separately deeded easement, because when they were created, they were on town way.
Mhm.
Now, whether you should be able to discontinue a town way on which there are residences, that goes to a whole nother discussion. And sometimes these were abandoned residences and there was a discontinuance, and then they were cheap. People bought them. There was a public easement they could get to and from. Life was okay. They didn't mind fixing up that road. At any rate, there's a public easement. Getting back to where we started from, though, we've got this statute that allows for road associations clearly on what should be private roads. So my strong suggestion is, with regard to private roads, that we ask to have that statute on road associations at least amended to change the private way reference to public easement and the other side to private roads. So it would be public easements and private roads. When you get to 3105A, wonderful lawyer reference. What this talks about is authorizing the town meeting being able to authorize municipalities to use trucks and plows on these public easements, except it says private ways, but they don't mean private roads. It's not to allow public money to be spent to fix private property, but to fix public easements. It's just you have the first 4 or 5 sections dealing with private roads and the other dealing with public easements. So I think we change it to make sure that we reflect what the reality is. And then the question is, do you want to allow road associations on public easements where the town doesn't do it and doesn't maintain it? And I think we might have a difference of policy, but that's something that I think is something that the commission should look at and resolve.
And here's where it gets sticky, because I would agree with you that the public easements does apply to that section 3105A, definitely. But as to whether we should go through the rest of it, and like in 3101, every place that it says private road or private way, should we be changing that to private road or public easement? Or if we do, then are we mandating that people contribute their private funds to maintaining a public road, which, as I said, I don't believe is constitutional. If my husband finds out that you're contemplating that, he will be through the roof, because he has been irate ever since that got put in there, that you can't force private individuals to maintain a public road.
And I just say it's not forcing, it would be an option. If the municipality didn't maintain it and you didn't want to be in the position you're in now doing this yourself, then you could form a road association with your neighbors.
However, you are then forcing your neighbors who didn't want to do it to contribute. Because if they don't pay, you can file a notice of claim against them.
That's true.
You can take them to small claims court. You could potentially take their property if they don't pay.
If you can find 3 or more neighbors to join with you to form that road association in the first place, you can elect yourself road commissioner, send the assessments and lien them for not paying. But is that better than taking it all on yourself?
If it's an association, are they exempt from the liability? I was just like Roberta has mentioned before, like the liability of it, where if she did maintenance to the road, the public easement, if they had an association, would they be?
They would.
Yes and no.
Liability?
There's a little paragraph in section 3101 that gives liability protection to the officers for their actions. But that doesn't cover you if there's an accident on the road. There's another paragraph that allows you to buy insurance.
Yeah.
But that has to come out of road association member dues.
It would be like any, well, first of all, what I would recommend if you're going to form a road association, maybe I shouldn't be giving legal advice, but I would say you would want to incorporate as a nonprofit, because that way you're not personally liable. And because an association, everybody as a member is liable if it's not incorporated. So you'd incorporate your road association and you go out and buy insurance. Those are the 2 things that you would want to do, I would think, if you were going to go down that path of
I would
forming a
think it
road.
would alleviate that issue of
Yeah.
question.
So that it isn't,
But you can't get the guy or whoever the landowner to pay to begin with. Now you're gonna require him to get a landowner member fee plus insurance. That what have we gained?
Mhm.
well, what you've gained is some certainty that there'll be a level of repair of that or maintenance of that road. Certainly, if you're on a private road, you're going to do that. And if you've got a public easement where the town's not going to maintain it, yet you're on there and you need the access, do you want to do that yourself or do you want to share that pain? And the only way to share it would be a road association. So I'm suggesting we leave it as an option for public easements where the municipality doesn't maintain. And I know Roberta feels differently and strongly, so, and so to say.
Or you mentioned if the town doesn't maintain, unless you do like Roberta suggested, and there's some sort of shared responsibility somehow, right?
You could have a voluntary road association and just ask people for donations. And if they want to contribute to maintaining a public road, then that's up to them. But I don't think you should mandate that they have to.
No, this would be an option, and if they want to do that informally, that's up to them.
Right, we had an association, it was too many people that said that this was bureaucracy, you know, it was just too much. So we had an informal road association, which, yeah, I didn't even want to mention, because you can have your road association, but you can also have an informal road association. Those that want to give, and that's what we did. So we didn't have to go through the paperwork, we didn't have to get the insurance, it was just too much. There was one landowner that said, yeah, this is too much paperwork, I don't want my names on all of this stuff. So we went informal, which those that wanted to give, gave, and we were able to take care of the road that way.
Okay.
But that's on a private road, and that's an informal road association.
Okay, so we
That's the
could,
Still is-
situation I was talking about
Yeah.
before, where you may have one person that does not want to be part of it. And if the
we
rest of
did.
them are okay with that, and want to make an informal road association, that's up to them.
now the difference is that if you have the formal road association, you have the immunity pursuit for the commissioner, the board, or whatever, and you can get insurance. For the entity, because if you have an incorporated association.
And that's what
that
they
you can
didn't
insure.
want. They didn't want.
If
all
you
of
have the
that.
informal, right now, you're out there, just as Roberta and David are right now for the work they do on the road. And so in that instance, that's why we have that immunity from liability provision that we were talking about. And what I put in there for discussion was the idea that you're doing this for free. I say that because if you're a landowner, there's immunity from liability for people who come on your property to hunt, fish, to hike, do any kind of passive recreation, so long as you're not charging. If you start charging, it's a commercial venture, and you ought to be like everyone else and buy insurance and be responsible for the people you bring onto your property. That's what the legislature decided under 14 MRSA section 159A. So borrowing the same concept, if you're being paid to plow everyone's driveway and to grade, you're being paid by your neighbors in this informal road association, or just you pass the hat and you're paid to do that. Should you also be getting the exemption, or are you in the same position as the landowner who charges admission? If you pay for it out of your own pocket, or you all split the cost individually without billing each other, that's one thing. But if you're doing it for pay, is that different? That's why the remuneration is in there.
Yeah, that was the section I had problems
I know.
with. And the reason is that, for example, on our road, this fall, there was one section of the road that was getting so bad, it was washing out badly, and it was before everybody's property, it was right near the beginning of the road. And, last spring during a heavy rain, we almost lost the first culvert. We would have lost it if David and I hadn't gone down and fished the brush out of the culvert and let the water go through it, because it was going over the top of the road. And we would have all lost access. So what we did this fall was we went around and we said, look, this part of the road is getting bad. If we don't do something about it, chances are in the spring, we're not gonna be able to get out. And we asked people, could you contribute gravel? We put in 2 loads, and each of 4 neighbors each put in 1 load of gravel. And David spent days just grading it, spreading it, grading it, packing it, regrading it, repacking it. And then all the hunters came in. And because we had a wet fall, every time one of them drove in or out, they left more ruts. And every couple of days, he was out there regrading the road, trying to make it smooth enough so that when we got snow, he'd be able to plow it. And if it had been just us, the day that we got that 1-inch snowfall, none of the people on the road went in or out. We all stayed put. But the hunters, great, we got snow, we can track the deer now, and they all drive in and out, in and out, in and out, and sharing all that snow melt water down into the road. So, this is where public use and all these people just contributed to keep that road up so the public can use it.
So what do we think about all that with regard to the private way, private road dichotomy?
Well, getting back to that clause you had in there about if you're getting paid for it.
Yeah.
Is there some way we can make that so that it's clear that if the people are contributing gravel or contributing to the cost of fuel for plowing or does that constitute paying somebody for doing it? He didn't get paid for all his work that he put in spreading it, grading it, packing it. But we did take the money from the people and, they
I think
they
what
gave
that's
us the money, we gave it to the gravel
referring to
company.
Specifically is like, I mean, use it for example, the North Main Woods, you pay a gate fee when you go in there. It's your access to their property, you pay a gate fee every time you go in, you buy a week pass or something like that. If someone, like, so in the state of Maine, it's illegal to lease for hunting rights. You cannot lease your land to hunt. But what you can do is you can lease it for recreational rights. So hiking, biking, snowmobiling, ATVing, like anything like that. So that's kind of where it comes into play, is if you're taking money for that. So if you're 40 acres, if you said, Chris, you can come over and ride your ATV here, but I'm gonna charge you $500 a month to ride your wheeler here, you wouldn't have any liability insurance. Like landowner liability wouldn't apply to you. So that's kind of where it comes in. I don't know if it's really the road, like you're paying $200 for a yard of gravel, and spreading it. I don't really see that it's that.
What
To
if
that
we,
extent.
yeah, what if we were to say, the idea is you're not getting paid, like $100 an hour or something, or $75 an hour to maintain the road, would say other than, reimbursement for materials and fuel.
Yep.
Used.
That would help.
I think that's very clear that way.
What if one of them wanted to chip in on his time?
Well, then you're starting to pay people for their services, and that's starting to sound like a business.
Like a guide, if I took you to go hunt and you wanted to pay me with, even if it wasn't money, if you take something for it, if you give me a gun in return for taking you out hunting, you're a guide without a license.
You're taking value.
Yeah.
It's one thing to be reimbursed for the actual cost of the materials and the fuel, whatever you use.
So if we rented a machine to do it with, rather than using our own machines,
That's-
then they could pay us for the rental?
They could pay you for the rental, because that's a cost of the equipment. You know,
So how
Would they reimburse for a machine and operator? That you have to, independent, like third party that you have to bring in to fix something big.
well, you guys are making this difficult.
Thank you.
Try not to miss any.
So we had that situation with the culvert, it failed. That's a big culvert. That was I don't even care how big it was huge. They have all the dimensions. What we had to do, because that was the only access to our property, all our property, what we did was we asked each person that it affected, and it affected everyone but one, and they gave monetarily, but there was a few people that did in-kind services. And in-kind services, would that be subject to liability? Because a lot of people, not a lot of people, okay, some people don't have the resources to give you money, they really don't, but they were willing to give you in-kind services, like with their backhoe, dig up the old culvert, and in-kind services comes into play a lot in Maine.
Right.
So, I mean, somewhere in the scheme of things, we need to make it so that this in-kind services doesn't go away and doesn't hold them responsible for, getting sued or something like that. Because Maine is an in-kind kind of service state. It really is.
Understood.
And there are a lot of people on these roads who don't have a lot of money. That's why they're there in the first place, because the land was cheap. It was all they could afford. And they find this land that's cheap and they say, ooh, if we can grab that piece of land, we'll have enough money left over. We can actually build a cottage or buy a camper or something and have a place where we can live that we can call our own and not have a mortgage that we can't afford to pay. So for example, you get the guy that we met that was plowing his discontinued road with a piece of plywood strapped to the front of his Jeep because he couldn't afford a plow truck. There's the guy that we're watching online now who is hoping that somebody will have the kind heartedness to give him a quad with a plow on it so that he can plow 2 miles to get out. And we're telling him the quad isn't gonna do 2 miles. You need a tractor.
At some point too, like, I mean, I have a driveway that I had to go buy a plow for. I bought a plow. Like, at some point you have to take some type of.
If you can afford it,
acceptance for
if
it. I
you can
know, but,
afford it, that's great.
but you have to, like, it's no choice. You either do it or you don't. At some point you have to say, like, you chose to live there. You have to take responsibility for it, right? I mean, I have to
Well,
maintain
that's a big part of what we're charged, is to decide that. Like right now in Frenchville, it's like that. There's someone that bought an little Amish building like the one I'm sitting in right now for the meeting, and they put it out in the back settlements, and now they want the town to go plow right to his house, for example, you know. And so who takes responsibility for what on what roads, I guess that's where we're getting to. But this is a tough one. And like, even if, like, for example, we've got a nonprofit. We carry liability insurance so that we don't get sued. You know, like some of our directors have machinery and have spread gravel on little roads that we have on our properties, for example, and we have to carry liability insurance for it, unfortunately, but that's what it is.
I agree that a town shouldn't have to resume maintaining a road if somebody moves in way out. And there's no other reason to maintain the road except for that one person. But part of the problem is, with the disclosure laws, we tried to get it through so that people would know when they buy a piece of property that the road isn't maintained by the public. And unfortunately, the disclosure doesn't always work, because sometimes the seller will tell them, oh yeah, it's a private road that's maintained by the abutters. And it isn't. It isn't private, and it isn't maintained by the abutters. So having people know what they're buying in the first place is definitely a piece of it, an important piece of it. But then there are other cases where maybe there's already somebody living on the road and the town decides to discontinue it. I've seen that happen too many times.
So, I mean, that to me is a separate situation, though. I mean, it's important, you know, as to who's maintaining and who isn't. But the liability issue, I think, is kind of all overreaching. I mean, if we could put a similar or the same or whatever recreational liability protection on these discontinued roads as applies on, you know, the roads that Chris mentioned earlier, you know, Weyerhaeuser, AFM or whatever, they're Swom, I mean, they're all protected under the recreational liability law. So all we really need to do is just get that same level of protection on these roads, whether, you know, you do it or somebody else does it, they shouldn't be liable. And if they can just get that on the books, it would seem as though we would get support for that. I think when you delve into the pushing of who's going to be responsible to maintain it, that's when it's going to get, you know, muddy, and then it all falls apart.
Thinking if there is a public easement through there, that you have that level of liability, the coverage.
Yeah, I mean, the idea is if you've got a private road, we know the road association can go out and get insurance, and there's some level of liability protection for a formal road commissioner, road association, commissioner, board, all of that. What we're dealing with is a public easement. In a public easement where the town maintains, no issue, right? The town's doing the work. Where the town doesn't is the problem. And they're right now, either individual landowners are doing the road in order to get to their house, or they are working with others in their neighborhood to get to their houses. And so the idea with this draft that we had of 159E was to have limited liability for people who do work on their own roads, their own public easements where the town doesn't maintain. And so it's a limitation on liability, and the remuneration section was just meant to bring in, if Roberta ran don't mean to pick on you, because for the example, if you ran a plowing company.
Me or any of the people I represent.
Exactly. If any of you owned a plow company and you are charging your neighbors to maintain that road, to grade it, in the spring. That's a different situation. You're like a private company, and it doesn't seem fair that you would be able to get an immunity from liability. But if you as a homeowner are doing this work and with other homeowners, then you shouldn't be held liable for maintaining that, so long as it's reasonably well done. And so the remuneration is meant to divide the abutters along the public easement from those who are operating a company.
Yeah.
So if we were to exempt out, other than for reimbursement for cost of equipment, materials, and fuel used, you can get that and not lose your liability. You could rent the grader, you could rent the plow, you could, maybe people could make a contribution toward your plow or whatever, right? But the idea is that you're not charging for your hourly rate, you're not charging for services. Does that make sense?
I think you're getting closer, but it's.
We're
like,
trying.
I wouldn't want to have to go out and rent a piece of equipment when we've already got one, just so that we can get the liability protection.
I don't think you'd have to.
No, you don't have to. We're just saying that
Just
if
think
you
that would
did,
cover you.
and you were
But-
repaid for the rental, then you wouldn't.
But if we don't rent the equipment, if we already own the equipment, can we get paid for the use of the equipment? For example, a number of years ago, the engine on our trackless snowblower blew in the middle of winter. And we had to drive to Canada in a snowstorm to get a replacement engine for it because they were the only people who had one that was the right fit for that vehicle at a price we could afford. And we had to drive up to Canada, get the engine, bring it back, put it into the machine so
Wow.
we could finish plowing the road.
And how old is this? We won't go there.
It's an old machine, so that's all we could afford.
Like, I understand. Okay,
Wouldn't
What-
that be a shout out to your neighbors saying, this is what we had to do in order for you to get to your house? Could you help us with it?
can we
But the,
bake
but the
sale?
question is, would this liability protection then not cover us because we're getting paid?
The landowner liability law that applies elsewhere would provide you with protection. That wouldn't opt you out of, the only thing that opts you out on the regular landowner liability law is either charging a fee for exclusive use or doing something malicious, intentionally malicious.
Right.
So
So-
why can't we just get that same level of protection on these roads as well?
Well, we're trying to figure out what the carve out is. You can't get paid for the services of plowing and grading and maintaining the road. But if you get reimbursement for your actual expenses, if you're helping other people out, then that shouldn't be an issue. So
Why can't
that's,
you get paid? I mean, the North Main Woods, the courts ruled that that gate fee doesn't negate the landowner liability, and that's for road fees. That's paying them to maintain the road, and they're still protected under landowner liability law. So why couldn't that happen here?
Can you include, use of equipment?
Yeah, it's all included, right, Chris?
Yeah, it is. It's no different than the groomer operators out grooming the snowmobile trail. They're covered under the landowner liability law because they're out there and some of them are getting paid to go out and run the equipment.
so we could say, other than
Volunteers, but.
for reimbursement of cost of use of equipment and repairs, materials and fuel,
That's getting pretty close.
we're trying.
It's a big improvement.
But
for what
somewhere-
we got
Yeah,
now.
I mean, I would think that would work.
Brian,
again?
you're asking that we just adopt landowner liability for the known discontinued and abandoned roads? Is that what you're trying to?
Yeah, I'm
approve?
saying, I mean, the reality here, John, is that what we found out is that the landowner liability law, which we thought all along applied to these discontinued roads, doesn't. Applies to all the other private landowners and private roads, but it doesn't apply to these. And I don't think we can amend, I mean, I guess we could, but I don't think that would happen. They wouldn't amend the existing landowner liability law, but if we can just put the same protection on these roads, personally, I don't understand why it already hadn't been that way, but they should just have the same level of protection so that either the landowner, because, I mean, you can debate whether the town's the landowner or whether the town has an easement, but the abutters are the landowner, or or what. There's all kinds of different cases out there, but in either case, whether they are butters or the landowner, whoever, they shouldn't be liable for doing maintenance on the road that's either on them or being used to get to their place.
Right, what we're trying to do here though is separate, there's no protection for liability for someone who's in the business of doing this maintenance work, because they may be maintaining private public roads, doing work for the town. But for the property owner along it, or groups of them, we want to make sure that they're held harmless. So when we say no remuneration, they don't get paid for doing that for their services, but they can be reimbursed for the cost of the use of equipment and repairs.
And for doing the work.
Well,
So can you say basically what you just said, which is you can't get it if you're doing it as a business?
right, well,
And then, you know, if you're not doing it as a business, then everything else is covered.
Yeah, I mean, like on Weyerhaeuser, for instance, or AFM or any of the big ones, Irving. Particularly on the ATV side, we reimburse for road grading and a variety of other things. And if the club does it, they're covered. If they hire a contractor, then the contractor has to have insurance because they're doing it as a business. So I would think the same general practice would apply here.
And it's funny too, because Brian and I were dealing with this recently where clubs thought that they were, you could probably speak to that a little bit, Brian, as to the insurance side of it, but probably don't want to dive into that a lot, but there was some misconceptions as to that.
well, maybe we could say a reasonable reimbursement for time, equipment, materials, repairs, fuel. Does that get us there?
I think that's fair, yes.
The landowners would have issues, Kyle.
I don't think so.
I think it helps them.
It helps them, yeah.
So if, you know, if you're on a public easement and the town isn't doing the repair work, then you can, and you're not going to be liable so long as it isn't your business. If
Or
it's your
egregious.
business, you should be out there getting insurance like everybody else.
Now, I have a quick question. What about trail masters? Are they covered under the organization?
They're covered under landowner liability, right, Brian? Trip
So
clubs
the
and trail.
landowner, keep in mind, landowner liability is a law. Insurance is a separate thing, all right? So the landowner liability law says the landowner is not responsible and says the club's not responsible. Technically, you know, as club members, they're covered under that, but we tell clubs to buy insurance to protect them, you know, to insure their equipment, protect them liability on the equipment, and the state also provides insurance. Just because we don't know what we don't know, and there have been cases, particularly on the snowmobile side, where clubs were sued, and you know that's the way to get at protection. So we actually help them. We help reimburse the coverage, you know, the insurance coverage, in addition to the law. The law basically says they shouldn't be liable, but we live in a society that's free to sue, so we provide that on top.
Basically, what people are scared of is someone climbing a tree stand and falling down and getting hurt.
Outside of cell
Right,
service.
right.
Yeah, that's true. The stupid part about this, the landowner I was on doesn't allow tree stands, which is why I climbed up to try to figure out who the hell put a tree stand up. So live and learn.
No subrogation against that landowner. Okay, well, I think we've made some progress.
Yes.
If we're all on board with this, and do we have to, I think we've got a consensus that's developed with regard to this landowner liability provision, and with the concept that 3105A, that allowing municipalities to spend money on private ways means public easement, so we can change it to public easement, we'll all be happy.
Mhm.
Including municipalities, because it'll be much clearer than it is right now.
Mhm.
Does anybody object to that?
I think we need to see the final and get it reviewed, but I would say that it looks like we're doing the right thing.
Okay. Now, since we're on a roll, let's go on the 3101 to 3104. Those are the sections that allow for road associations. Right now, when you take a look at it, it says private ways and private roads, private roads and private ways at the beginning of that. My suggestion, and I know it's not unanimous, would be that it be private roads and public easements for the whole thing. And then when we get to that 3105, it's just public easements. The idea being that you can form a road association on a private road, and you can form a road association, you don't have to, but you can, on a public easement. What do we think?
You know my objection.
I understand Roberta's objection, and it goes to the constitutionality of that.
It's a great idea because it shares the cost between everybody.
Will the towns actually be in favor of that? A road association on what they consider they own?
If it keeps people away from town hall screaming at them to repair the public easement, I think they'll be happy.
So what we're saying is it's an option.
Correct.
And the road association wouldn't impose any restrictions on that public easement, right?
It couldn't restrict the right of public access. It could not.
I think that would work only if you can put a clause in there that the town contributes some money to it too.
I like that idea.
Wow.
I'm sure.
That changes
I think
the
you
whole
just
thing.
lost the town though.
Yeah.
Not necessarily, it's an option,
Something
Brian.
that says, if the town's maintained a public easement, every 5 years they have to contribute or whatever.
Yes.
Whatever
something.
the time frame is, decided, but why don't they have to contribute if there is a public easement? I mean, the problem is, I do see, I'm not trying to speak for Roberta, but if the town of Fayette came in and improved your road and created a better road in there, the public's gonna use it more. So that's not what you want.
Right.
A lot of these.
We actually had that happen because after the town voted not to repair the road, a bunch of volunteers got together and formed a Help Your Neighbor committee. And they came in, they spent 2 weekends and they did a fantastic job on the road. But that was, let's see, 30 years ago, 35 years ago. And it didn't last. And because we now had a bigger, wider road, as you said, we had more people using it. So
So if every 5 years the town had to provide maintenance for a public easement, just continue the road with public easement.
or another option that I keep saying is, if the town owns property on the road or has some reason for the public to use it, like say pond access or, access to public land or access to an ATV trail or a snowmobile trail or whatever that town needs that public easement for, contribute enough to maintain that.
I don't think that the town should have to have a reason to be in there if they have a public easement.
Why do they keep a public easement if they don't have a reason to be there?
Well,
Yeah, it's a great question.
There are some cases where a town actually owns public land, and in that case, I think they definitely should be a member of the road association if there's gonna be one.
sure, there may be a town forest, or there might be
Right.
some.
But not all of them.
And I know a lot of cases where there is a town forest or something to that effect on one of these discontinued roads, and there is a road association, and they cannot get the town to contribute.
One
So
road.
the town doesn't. I mean, I can think of several right now actually where the state owns land, town doesn't. And the public easement is being used to access state land, particularly by hunters and by snowmobilers in the couple I'm thinking of, but
A boat launch.
And when you
that
think about,
happens too. But usually the funding for boat launches doesn't happen unless there's a clear process. I know, at least on in the Bureau of Parks, they won't. I think that's true though, Chris, on IF&W too, right?
Much like, ours, we own it. Like this pretty clear cut and dry on boat launches unless it's.
Just like they won't stock fish unless there's public access.
Correct.
Let's not get into fish stocking.
Yeah.
That's a sore subject.
Okay, we won't go with stocking fish. All right,
Has that ever been talked about, Jim, like where there is like a timeframe that the towns would have to contribute, like? Has it ever been, I mean, it's had to have been thought of.
well, I'm sure it's been discussed by some folks, but let's go back just a little bit, because how do you get a public easement? One way is because you're laying it out for a natural resource. That's the recreational easement, but that's only been around since about 1976, 77, that type of public easement. And so there aren't very many of those. The bulk of the public easements are discontinued old roads. They were discontinued because the town didn't want to maintain them and nobody lived there. The farms were abandoned. The roads were just woods roads. There was no need for the public for it to be maintained safe and convenient passage as a public way, as a town way. So they were discontinued. The public easement was retained so that the woodlot owner wouldn't say, hey, you owe me damages because I don't have access to my property now. You've got the public access you can use. And if there were some need to maintain it, you could go approach the town, and the town meeting could vote to spend money. That's what 3105A is all about. So it's not like there's a necessity. It's not like every public easement has people living on it. There are some people who do live on public easements, and that's just happened over time, whether it's people who bought the old abandoned farmhouse or built out there because the land was cheap and the town didn't require you to get a building permit on a town way. It's happened. So do you want to make the towns look at every road, every public easement that's out there on a timely basis? Do you want them to be mandated to do some maintenance every 5 years, where in a lot of instances, there may be no need for it. No one's using it. It's just a woods road.
You put the exception in that unless there's somebody living there, or there's a public property that has to be accessed.
There's a reason to be there.
Well, it's always.
I mean, Roberta, you moved onto that road 40 years ago, like you said. In another 40 years, people are gonna be moving on to other discontinued roads. It's only gonna grow. Our population's growing, land is becoming smaller. People are buying these parcels of land because, like you said, it's cheap. They're moving out of the cities, they're buying these places, and they're like, it's a good opportunity. It's only gonna increase.
Yeah, even in northern Maine, where the population is declining, we're taking up 3 times the space now that we used to. There's a lot of urban sprawl everywhere.
Hard to think of urban sprawl in Presque Isle, but I understand.
Is Rebecca on or is she not today?
Rebecca's not on, otherwise we would have heard from her by now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what worries me.
Yeah, well,
She had a family emergency, so she wasn't able to make it.
I just feel like something that the towns will push back at
Oh,
some
I
of
guess.
this.
So.
She said she would watch the video and I will send it to her so she can take a look at it and then she'd get back to us with her comments, but she had a family emergency and had to fly out, so.
I was just wondering the same thing, like, I mean, to Brian's question, what it would be the town, I mean, obviously the towns will push back on that, but
Mhm.
what is the reason? I mean, just cost probably.
well, the cost, and they would view it as an unfunded state mandate. If the state is now requiring it to provide new services that it never had to do before, and so the state ought to be contributing toward that. And
That'll put a fiscal note on it and that'll kill everything. So we gotta be really careful.
that's exactly right.
That brings up another thought that we've had, which is that we already have Title 23, Section 3651, which says that towns must keep their roads safe and convenient for the public with motor vehicles.
For town
for
ways.
travelers with motor vehicles, for townways. But these discontinued roads used to be townways. Why didn't they do what they were supposed to do on them, especially on the abandoned roads, where they just stopped maintaining them without any formal discontinuance
A
process?
wise guy once said that statutory abandonment means you stop doing what you're supposed to have been doing for long enough that you don't have to do it anymore.
Yeah,
Okay?
yeah.
And-
Where else do we have a law in the books that says that if you break the law long enough, it's okay?
Yeah, I understand. And, however, the reason that's there is There are public ways that people just stop using. Hunters might use them, but that's not the general public. ATVs might use them, but again, that's not the sportsmen are not the general public. If the general public stops using a road for 20 or more consecutive years, that road goes away. There's no public easement. That's the statute. That's the common law abandonment. The problem is that that's a pain in the neck to go to court and spend $100,000 in Superior Court to try to prove that there's been an abandonment because the public stopped using the road anymore. And so what the legislature did was create a shorthand for that. Say, if for 30 consecutive years, beginning 46 to 76, the town hasn't spent money, then there's a presumption that can be rebutted that it no longer is a town way, that it's discontinued and there's a public easement that remains, just like in a discontinuance. Now, the legislature unfortunately mangled the two terms and said it's discontinuance by abandonment. Two different concepts. Abandonment is just, you're not using the road anymore. Discontinuance is a formal process where you deliberately say, we are not going to use this road or this section of road anymore. Nonetheless, the legislature said abandonment by discontinuance by abandonment. So we're all, we contribute to our own confusion, and that would be something that'd be nice to unwind if we felt like it, but I think we've got enough on our plate this time.
I went through that and
Yeah.
corrected it all.
You did?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll have to find that. So at any rate, that's the reason why we wind up with these discontinued ways, because generally they weren't being used anymore. And the town didn't want to have to maintain them safe and convenient. And maybe they had stopped in some instances with statutory abandonment or common law abandonment, but at any rate, they're just not being used anymore. And so that's why we have it. So if you force municipalities to take care of public easements on roads that weren't being used much anymore, and that's why they were discontinued, what have you done? Except in the instance where there's some people living on them, where maybe that does help, but that's going to be a fiscal note. That's going to be a state mandate, and you're going to get objections to this.
Here's where I say the minimum maintenance roads would allow you to distinguish between the ones that nobody's really using anymore. Don't make the town contribute if nobody's using the road. Or a road that's being used on a minimal basis. Maybe you want it as a fire lane, so you just have to go through once a year and make sure there's no major blowdowns on it or something. But where there's a road that's being used for residential purposes or for access to town property, then specify that that's why the public has a need to keep the road there and let it be maintained to a lesser standard.
That would be your minimum maintenance road.
Yeah. And then, so, maybe your idea of contributing every 5 years, maybe you don't have to do that on the ones that aren't being used at all. But as far as being an unfunded mandate, when you take a piece of property, and I know I've said this before, when you take a piece of property that's been in tree growth and they're getting very little in tax revenue off of that property, and somebody comes in, cuts all his trees off of it, divides it up into house lots and sells them, and all of a sudden now you're taxing those as residential properties, maybe with nice houses on them. Even if it's a modest house, you're still getting considerably more in tax revenue off of that land than you were when it was in tree growth. Why can't you take just a proportion of that increase in the tax revenue and put it into putting some minimal maintenance into that road?
If somebody were to do that, they'd probably be getting subdivision approval. One of the subdivision standards is access onto the property. And you'd have to provide an access from the public access or a new street at your own expense as developer in order to do that.
Not necessarily though, because sometimes they sell the whole lot, somebody buys it, keeps a lot for themselves and sells off the rest of it. Somebody buys that, keeps a lot for themselves and sells off the rest of it.
Or you get the family subdivision
there's no actual subdivision. It's just one at a time, these houses go in. Or maybe even just one per woodlot. Maybe it's not a subdivision at all, just one house per woodlot. Sorry, I missed what you said.
It's actually a private road that, the family bought, but.
Right.
I want to go back to your 5-year plan. I've done a lot of budgets, and if the town does a 5-year plan on this minimum maintenance, that will lessen that fiscal note, because you can save a little bit in your capital improvement to put toward each of these roads. So if the town only did it once every 5 years, which I know isn't the greatest scenario that, you know, you would have, but if they did it in a 5-year plan, which most towns have a 5-year plan, then that would lessen the fiscal note, because they can put a little away every year to do this. And then they would come out and put you on that, you know, that 5-year thing.
So we would say minimum maintenance roads, just to flesh this idea out. Minimum
Yeah.
maintenance roads, would be those roads where people live, there are residences along it, for as long as there are residences, I assume, to the furthest residence from the public way. Or if they reach public land, state or municipal or county. Okay, and those would become minimum maintenance roads. They're a class of public easement. And what that would obligate is the municipality to perform that minimum maintenance at least every 5 years. Once every 5 years at least.
It's a start.
It's a
And
start.
what would that maintenance be, just so that we know what it is that they'd have to do? Or what the standard is?
The standard would be passable. You have to be able to have that land be passable.
Something less than safe and convenient, but passable. Safe and convenient is what we have for our streets, townways.
In other words, inconvenient but passable. Possibly not safe, but passable.
Safe yet inconvenient.
Unsafe, inconvenient.
How about passable if you don't have a 4-wheel drive? You know, you'd have to specify that, I suppose.
Because not everyone's gonna have a 4-wheel pickup, they'll have a
Right.
Prius.
Yeah.
Mhm.
We support the idea of minimum maintenance roads, but I think it shouldn't be limited to those that are just residential. I go back to the example that we have of our land in New Gloucester where we own both sides of the road. And they're considering turning it into a discontinued road. And if the public is still accessing that road and causing the damage, why should we as the landowners, you know, pay that damage? It's no different than a residential owner.
So it's, again, it depends on public use. If the public is using it, they ought to contribute just enough to sustain that use.
Right.
You know, we're discussing two different points here. One carries a fiscal note, one is just the landowner liability. Can we break that in 2 points or two separate situations, not roll us in as one bill? Because if the fiscal note's attached to it, right, we won't gain any ground on the,
And
is that impossible?
It's possible to submit some of these as separate bills.
One is a zero fiscal note, one is
Correct. Well,
a,
And we got a glimmer of hope of getting the landowner
yeah, we're not
liability.
gonna get it through. There's 300 bills that are on appropriations.
You mean this
This
session?
session.
Oh, yeah, this is not a good session.
I agree.
This is-
So how would we define the public easements that are capable of being minimum maintenance roads? It would be if people are living on, there are residences along there. It would be if there are public lands that are accessible by that. And in your example, Carl, how would that?
I was just thinking in Carla's example, it's open to public access.
right,
So like you're saying that like.
They all are, though.
Holmes land is open
But
to
the land-
recreational access. So if you have, like, I mean, some private landowner like Swam that allows public access, then there should be some minimum maintenance to it.
okay, so public land or private land that's open to public access?
It's an encouraging thing for.
Open to public
landlords to use their
recreation?
land. It's,
Is it?
It's recreation. I mean, it's just access generally, yeah, but
it's
typically
an incentive for
recreation.
landowners to keep their land open to access
Right.
if there's a right of way, if there's an easement.
Well, I mean, additionally, the town or whatever, over time, we've got a bunch of them out there where the town has told either ATV or snowmobile clubs that they can use it for public recreation. They aren't necessarily going to Swan Land or anything else. They're just going through to the next town. Does that fall into that as well?
That's a little different because it's not land access, it's just use of the road itself. And I would think if they're allowing use of the road as, say, as an ATV trail, then the ATV club would be contributing to the maintenance.
Which they do.
Right, I would agree, but sometimes the towns have said they can't, so I think we just need to make sure that this would allow that. Cause what I've said consistently to the towns is, we should be, contributing. And if we do it either through a grant with a club or a grant, through a town to a club or whatever, we can contribute money that way. On the ATV side, we can, they've only got to match 10%, which is pretty minor in the big scheme of things. So I think we should, at the very least, whether we mandate it or not, we need to make sure that they can do it so we can try to help them.
So we create a minimum maintenance, classification of roads. If the roads are being used for residential purposes, for public property, or if it's private land open to recreation or access.
I kind of like the idea of if the town actually owns a piece, isn't a butter, or the town, hey, they got a stake in the game, they should contribute.
If it's.
They're gonna turn around though and say, well, what about the IF&W land? IF&W's gotta contribute. What happens then, Chris?
Great question. I mean, I know where I personally feel about it, but, I'd have to ask the higher ups as to where we, I mean, obviously, it's weird because, I mean, like we talked about a lot, state land, like we don't have a lot of state land here in the state of Maine, whether that's conservation land or department land, and a lot of things that come up out of that are, it's not taxed. It's, so state land, you don't get tax revenue from, the towns don't get any money from it. So it's a double-edged sword when it comes to state land, because it's owned by the state, it's open to the public, but there's no tax contribution to it, so. I don't know, I mean, I think that would have to be money that would be put aside. Yeah, I mean, similar to your ATV trail, maintenance, like that would be if it's state land, like department land that we own, it'd have to be money put aside for that. I think if that would continue public access to it, I think it would be, it's a win-win. I mean, it's not it's just where's the money come from? Where's the money come from?
Department of Conservation has done a lot of harvesting in our conservation areas in northern Maine. It's another day for that conversation, I think, but they have made a lot of roads on them. I don't know what the plan is to maintain the roads they've made on them, but we do have that issue here too, for sure.
A lot of times, I mean, obviously, like our department land and stuff, we have our foresters out there, they cut wood on them, they do harvests and stuff like that, and the money goes towards the maintenance of the land and stuff, so I don't know if that's where. But yeah, it's always.
Well, in this particular case, in Hamlin here, in this particular case, they're not planning to be back for 20 years. So, but they've made a lot of roads in Hamlin. So I don't know what they've got planned for road maintenance if they're not planning any harvest.
But those roads aren't part of the discontinued road base. Those are basically they're public roads because it's public land, but they're really no different than say a warehouse or AFM road. They're wood harvest roads, which in many cases they will maintain them and keep them open to the public, but in some cases they will block them off, just like the larger landowners are doing.
I think like Brian's saying, on a discontinued road that has access to the state land, the state has a vested interest in getting access to it.
Right.
Whatever happens there, like I think that's really the end all. Like we have an interest in getting the public to that land because that's a place that they can access.
Just like a town would if there was a town piece of property.
Right.
All right, so does the commission do we want to move forward with the idea of this minimum maintenance road?
Does it have to be an abandoned, discontinued road to become a minimum maintenance?
So it would have to be a public easement first, either because it was laid out as a private way or because it's a leftover from a discontinued or statutorily abandoned road. Let's take a does everyone understand the proposal? Minimum maintenance road, it would be those roads that provide access to, residences, to public property, to private property that's open for recreation, and access. And, I'll make that as a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, and all in favor? Let's do this as a roll call vote.
Hold on, Jim.
Substance.
We had discussion in there.
Okay, discussion.
I'm wondering what minimal maintenance really means. I mean, you're talking about passage. Passage by what? Motor vehicles?
Subaru.
What does passable mean?
Is there a standard for the, I'm sorry, is there a standard for the private dirt roads, like
No.
the people have roads, so they can have it whatever they want it to be?
Whatever they agree on.
I was just curious.
No, that, whatever they agree on. But
There's also
I had a-
that,
Excuse me, I had a quick question about it, like the access to private land where the public is allowed access. Okay, that one. Imagine someone having land way out in the willy wags again, right? And they don't, like, is there a standard for that land? Say if I've got 20 acres way out there and I allow the public to access it, does that mean the town has to maintain access to my property?
no,
Okay,
not unless it's an old discontinued way and there's a public easement out there, or if it's an abandoned road and it's
But
discontinued.
he's got a point there. Say we opened our 20 acres up and said, okay, the public can use this now. Does that mean we could then force the public to maintain it?
I don't think so, because the
So
public
you
has
gotta
to
be careful with the
accept,
wording.
the public has to accept a property right. Let me put it this way, you can lay out a road, but the town has to lay out a road and say, we're gonna take this property and pay the abutters, $100 per acre or whatever for this land. And then the town meeting has to accept it.
So what about the situation that Carla was talking about, where they allow public access to the woodland? Does that,
But that's over a public easement.
yeah, well, I'm saying, like, ours
There's
is
a
a public
public
easement
access,
too.
right, public access, there's a right of public access there. What Steve was talking about was a private road, just saying, I've got a private road to the Willy Wax and I'm gonna open it up to the public. Well, he can invite the public, but that doesn't make it a public way. The public has not accepted a property interest in that, so it
But
has no obligation.
But you're missing my point.
I-
My point is, if there is a public easement and somebody owns a big chunk of land in on that public easement, no house on it or anything, but they just say, hey, I'm gonna say that my land is open to public access. Does the town then have to build a road up to that land? So you gotta be careful how
That's
you
what
word
this,
this.
that's what this definition would say. If it's land on, both sides or land on either side that's private but open to public recreation. If you're gonna invite the public down, using Carla's definition, not blaming you, but if you use it, then the town's gonna have to do that minimum maintenance.
We just see
What
it
if
as
the
a
public
fairness
doesn't want
issue,
it?
I guess.
Hmm?
I said, we just see it as a fairness issue, I guess. That, the public is still gonna use that discontinued road with a public easement on it. So why should a forest piece of land be treated differently than a residential piece of land? There's still gonna be the damage and the.
Right, see, that's where the public actually is using it. What I'm saying is, if you're not careful with the wording here, you could have some piece of land that the public hasn't been using. And somebody says, oh, here's my chance to get the town to build that road, so maybe I can put in a house on my property. There isn't one
I
there
would say
now,
that's
but
currently
if I say there's public
possible, or-
access to it, then they'll have to build the road. Cause that'll get it killed for sure.
And anecdotally, folks who live on public easements and do the maintenance themselves complain most about ATVs and logging trucks as far as
And four-wheel drive.
damaging the work that they've done at their own expense. Just that's anecdotally what we hear.
Mhm.
If we encourage these minimum access ways and municipal maintenance at least once every 5 years in order to help people get to logging roads, getting to forest properties, are we then saying that those ruts are gonna be fixed by the municipality? And is that fair? I don't know the answer to that question. but that would be part of the fiscal note.
I think
Yeah,
on
I
the-
mean, your minimum passable there becomes a huge issue because, the situation in Rumford, they wanna, the person who bought the land in there wants to build a house. In order to do it, they need to get cement trucks in there. So they want all of the bridges upgraded to 125,000 pound capacity. And that doesn't, in my mind, that's not minimum standards or minimum maintenance or whatever, but so that very much needs to be clarified, because the other thing, if they're only responsible once every 5 years, does that mean it's gonna be passable when they do it and the rest of the time it's not, or how's that work?
Pete, you're the road guy, what do you got? to
Yeah,
say?
so again, minimal maintenance is what to what sort of vehicle? It's if it gets overgrown and all the bushes start pushing on each side of the road and it starts scraping my car, that I just spent $50,000 on. Does that mean that the town needs to come in and cut the brush? Or, is it potholes? Is it culverts that got a big divot in them? I can see if you can't actually pass, you can't get through. That's one thing that would have to be fixed, but I can see this raising lots of issues when they're not gonna get a whole lot of maintenance at all, so all the overgrowth is gonna start, there's probably no ditches anyway, drainage is gonna be bad. What does this really mean? I can see this opening up all kinds of interpretations.
There is a minimum standard for street design and construction. There is definitions for minimum standard. So when it comes to roads, like our road was in it's in a watershed, so we had to crown it more on one side so it didn't go toward the water. There's a definition for minimum standard. I'm sure we went through it. I really believe we've gone through it before, what the minimum standard is. There's minimum standard for street design.
But that's only if the town has it. There's
No,
no,
I just picked this up from the state. There's a minimum standard.
Where are you seeing that?
yeah, we're looking at that.
So this is the town of Franklin that I picked up. I put in minimum standard street, and I should have put road instead, but I put street. So I'm gonna go back and put road instead.
Okay.
But there is a minimum standard already in there. A lot of your contractors already know what the minimum standard would be for any given area.
That's true, and you'll find that every town that has a subdivision regulation will have a minimum standard for a road that it will accept in a subdivision, which is totally different from
Yeah,
just
yeah.
what Jim might build on a private road
Or even if they're not subdivisions, some towns
or
have
site plan.
road standards in case someone wants to have the town accept a single private road. But there's no, there are industry recommendations. There's ASHTO, there's DOT specifications. Those are all, DOT ones apply to DOT. There's no minimum standards for town roads unless the town actually accepts a set.
And then you have to meet
Or
those,
isn't it?
then you have to meet those standards.
Right, but if the town hasn't accepted anything, there's just recommended things out there from different agencies. You
And where
can take them or leave them.
Right, and where the town accepts those standards, they usually have a specified width depending on how many houses
Yeah.
are being served and
Right.
what the sub base is, what the top is, if it's gravel, if it's paved, what the thickness is for those top layers, what the grading would be, what the drainage will be,
That's way above.
way
what
above
we're
the pay
talking
grade
about.
of what we're talking about here.
Right.
So should we have a definition for minimum standard for dirt roads
We,
going forward?
What I've thought of in the past is that a minimum might be annual grading and a load or two of gravel in the worst spot. And if you do that every year, eventually you're gonna have a road that is passable. And
So
believe me, that's a
storm-
whole lot more than what we're getting
So
out
we
of the
get a
public
storm
now.
cleanup every summer now.
What's
Yeah,
that?
until we get the storms that we've had the last couple summers,
Mm.
because it's gonna wipe it out in about a day. Ask Brian about his ATV trails and they're gone.
Yeah, and, you know, the towns that have gravel roads now, especially the small ones, they're paying a contractor to come in and try to do them at least once a year. Adding more to that load and paying for that is not gonna go over well. Plus, the road's probably not built anyway, there's no gravel there to push around, it's roots and rocks and everything else, and you just physically can't grade it. So, if you keep to the general definition of passage, can we drive through this from one end to the other? Sure, we may have to go at 5 miles an hour and roll through the potholes, but it's passable.
Do you have to have high clearance four-wheel drive?
Yeah, is it passable to a Prius? No, but is it passable to any other modern vehicle that's got some clearance? Yes.
I still say a Subaru, it's good middle ground. You can get through the
We're not
Subaru.
gonna
you
start
got
naming
okay
vehicles.
road.
It'll be interesting. The official state car of public easements, yeah.
Relative to the width of a Subaru.
Anyone online who would like to throw out an idea for passable and what that means to us?
I would just say that if you don't define it, and I agree, defining it's going to be hard, but if you leave it just passable, then that means if we can get a snowmobile through it or an ATV through it, it's passable. And I don't think that's really what you want. So I think you at least need to define it as some kind of, passable by a off-road capable motor vehicle or something.
Or just a motor
I was
vehicle.
gonna say, by
Passenger
motor standard on the
Then
roadway.
it's defined, what a motor vehicle.
Right.
You need the definition for sure.
You know, obviously, if
Just
the tree is
passable.
down, it's not passable. If the pothole is 2 feet deep, across the width of the road, it's not passable.
If the culvert's out, it's not passable.
Correct. All those things are easy. But if it's something where you have to literally, it's like a moonscape out there with so many potholes. Is it passable?
Sure.
Yeah, it probably is if you go slow enough.
Well, the current standard for town way, for the streets that we drove on getting here, is safe and convenient passage by motor vehicle. So what is less than that, that still allows passage by motor
Less than
vehicle?
5 miles per hour.
See?
That's passable by motor vehicle.
And
Unsafe and inconvenient.
Yeah.
No, I mean, we keep talking about a Prius, but I've personally seen an idiot who happened to be drunk with a Corvette on one of these. That was an ATV trail and he was all screwed up.
so is the Corvette, no doubt.
Yeah, I don't think you
One
should
of
say
my,
anything about
one of my
safety
earliest
or-
memories on our road was going up to visit when we hadn't moved back in there yet. And finding some guy who had gotten his wife's car stuck up beyond our place and had bent one of the clutch linkages. And my husband went in, unbent it for him and sent him home.
Wow.
The benefits of being a shade tree mechanic.
Shouldn't be anything.
That's good, but as far as like a standard for that, I don't know how you're gonna come up with that, like what you're gonna say. Are you gonna require four-wheel drive? I mean, if somebody had an old 1970 Bel Air, they might be able to get through or something. But I
What
mean,
if-
I don't know I don't know what the standard is, but it would have to be specific for sure.
What if we had something that said, passable by emergency vehicle? I mean, like, we have forestry, the warden service, state, they're all driving four-wheel drive off-road vehicles, but, and
Yeah.
generally that's always the fire lane issue for forestry and fire departments is whatever, it's just passable enough so they can get in there if they need to deal with a fire.
Okay,
That's a good idea. That's a good idea.
we're talking about opening up public easements so people can get to their houses. I don't know that they're gonna take emergency vehicles home.
No,
And-
but it opens it up for emergency vehicles to be able to get down there, and if you do that, then it's passable.
Well,
It's just, you
Passable.
have some towns with some pretty good sized fire trucks that are wide. They're not gonna wanna take those up there with the brushes, just scraping the side out of the fire trucks.
when you
But
bring the
they'll,
fire
but they'll
chief,
take their pumper truck there. See,
Just fire trucks imply more width.
and wait,
Yeah.
Don't say fire truck, just say emergency vehicle.
yeah,
well, then the fire chief's gonna go out and say, there's no way I can bring a pumper truck down that
Well, I mean,
road.
every fire department has guys with pickups, four-wheel drive trucks. They don't, I mean, they have big trucks, but when they show up, there's like 2 or 3 fire trucks and 14 littler ones.
Yeah, there's not gonna be a hydrant by these houses on a
Right,
public
so
easement
they're
for
they're
the
pumper
guys with
trucks.
pickup trucks to tap into.
My town of Randolph's got 2 big trucks, period.
Yeah.
Then there's a guy I know who told the fire truck, whatever you do, keep right. And the first truck in went left, and nobody could get in after that.
Whoops. You've thought about this a lot, Roberta, on minimum maintenance roads, like what was your, originally, like when you were thinking about this, what was your definition of the road?
No, my original thought was, as I said, grade it once a year and put in a couple loads of gravel. As you said, in a year like we've had this year, that might not go very far, but
Most of these roads aren't gradable now.
Right.
Right.
I mean, and what we're really talking is about 2,000 loads of gravel to get them gradable, so that's not even realistic.
That's what I was thinking, as soon as you start saying once a year, I was like, you're not gonna get any buy-in.
No. Because a lot of towns, they only maintain their gravel roads once a year.
Yeah.
They hire the guy for once, and that's it.
If that.
And that's with gravel, they can move around. If these roads here that haven't been used in a while, it's rocks and roots and there's no gravel to push. I'm not taking my grader down there.
Most of those roads were built with a bulldozer and they started out life lower than the ground around them afterwards, and they've just gone from bad to worse.
Well,
So-
we're kind of spinning our wheels on this.
so I
so to
have a
speak.
definition here. Minimum standard means the minimum essential requirements for ambulance and emergency medical services. I mean, it's,
You can't go that far.
We can't
because
go
there's
that
People that
in-depth.
don't wanna take their ambulance
Hey,
down.
Chris, you pour me a cup of coffee too while you're at it?
On it.
Virtual coffee is our
I'm gonna
service
eat a
here.
donut for you, Brian.
I need smell-o-vision.
but there's another one that says it means the operational and reclamation standards outlined.
No,
No, too much.
nothing to reclaim.
Most road standards talk about the width of the way
Depth of
and
gravel.
the depth of the
all
gravel
pipes.
and whether there's drainage and what that looks like.
what gravel?
Well,
I go back to that picture of maintenance of Route 1 in 1911 or whatever it was. And they've got a horse with a tip cart and several guys with shovels. And that's how a lot of these roads were last built, if you can call it. And now we're expecting.
You want that as the minimum standard now?
and private companies owning bridges and charging them for using them. No, I think
I think we're on the right track, but it's gonna take some work before we've got something ready to present.
so. This piece of it, the minimum maintenance road probably isn't going to be ready for this report. Is that fair enough?
Yeah.
Okay,
Right.
so it was. We won't discount the gains that we've made with regard to private ways and private roads and public easements so far, but we will put minimum maintenance roads as a class of public easement aside for future. When we're not under the gun to get a report out by January of 2024.
My
That could go
husband
on
probably
your,
won't be happy, but I think that's being realistic.
that could go on your second bill where the fiscal note will be attached, and this could go on minimum standard could go on that bill.
Well, it could, but we don't have a standard of what passable means, and I think maybe that's something for us all to think about. You know, those of us who want to bring that forward, think about what objective standard a town would build a road to be passable. And what would be the guidelines, and we can be thinking about that and bring that back next year as we're thinking through what the priorities are for the next year. We're not going to solve all the road problems now. We will make a dent in it.
That's
and
why they made it a permanent commission.
That's right. It's a standing committee, and we're gonna make a dent in it this year.
What, this is permanent?
As permanent as things get.
Now you know why I'm so grateful.
Do we want to take 5? We've been working
I
since
think
9
we
o'clock.
should put in term limits.
I'll vote for that.
I like term
I'm here
limits,
for
no,
I know you-
but I need a break.
Okay, let's take
Kill me first.
5 minutes, just
Yeah.
and then we'll see what we can do to
I
wrap
like
up.
the incentive for landowners. he said.
So-
The first trail,
Baker
the first
Pond-
snowmobile that rides off trail up there, which I guess is a huge off
What the
trail riding place.
so this is the county
He
road,
goes,
this
this first
falls
snowmobile,
Somerset
it's
County.
done. And I go, I can't stop
Somerset
that.
County.
I was like, I'll get the majority.
Tom
I
Hegan, I
can't
remember.
stop that one snowmobile. I'm like,
So it's, I just want to tell you, goes right through.
Used to work.
Oh, the
And he
old
wants to shut that down.
yeah. Because right now it's gonna be open.
Yeah,
But he's like,
no,
the first
I-
snowmobile that goes
I
off
think
trail, it's stopped.
For some reason, I do know him.
I don't know how I
and
stop that. Like, I literally
He's a
can't
real
have.
nice
I gotta have
guy.
that
Yeah, I
plane
know
across
that.
the covered up there. Yeah, like, I mean, starting right now.
So,
So it doesn't, yes,
see, there's nothing.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
so it's not
Big
coming
topic,
back
but
in
I don't know,
on the
I mean,
other side. She
forever.
was wrong on
My
that.
wheels are turning
they-
just to like
they
how we're
stop
gonna
at his
continue
land
recreation
and
throughout the state.
her
It's just like,
boyfriend
I
wants,
remember this.
her
That's not
boyfriend
a,
wants
yeah, that's
to
a
give
win.
Yeah.
access to his camp and he has to.
I don't know what the
stop.
answer is, you know, you
Take
talk
the
to.
snowmobile.
We're having an MDOT huddle right now
This
to,
Baker Brook Point
What
Road
tax incentives
or
are.
Skinny Road,
Incentives.
because that's where.
It's not the way to go
Yeah.
because as soon as you give it to one, everyone else is
Right,
paying
right.
up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're in it right now.
I've been.
Yeah, I don't know, I think it's
about
further
that one.
discussion as to what we.
So
was
there's,
talking to-
the
So I bet-
county maintenance
saying
goes to
there's
right there.
Big push from the dog hunters. The dog hunters have had a lot of issues this year with people ripping the collars off the dogs and taking the dogs.
So there's a lot
They're
of camps
like-
up there
they're
that they
like-
have no
They
access
found
to.
her daughter's dog in like South Carolina at a shelter.
Landowner.
They're finding collars like in the woods.
But he doesn't
I've
own
actually
the
heard of it.
road.
I've heard some dogs.
And he
getting
owns
picked
a
up
dirt
and
under
taken
it.
out.
And I
See him
told
drive by in the
No,
vehicle.
no person that owns both
They're
sides
like-
of the
That's
road.
crazy.
They're looking- Legislation in.
They may.
Make it a
Question
felony
is,
here.
Yeah.
was it ever a road?
Wow, that's crazy.
okay, well, we're having philosophical discussions about ownership of roads and road rights. Let's think about this. When's our next meeting is scheduled for December 19 or 20?
19.
19. Okay, and that's at 1 o'clock?
Yes.
So December 19 at 1 PM, we are going to vote on a report. And that report will be a narrative like we have here in draft form and draft legislation, draft proposed legislation. I don't know who would sponsor, but I suppose someone on state and local might look at this and say, okay, these are reasonable ideas, and we'll move these forward in 1 or 2 or 3 bills. It's going to be dependent upon the sponsor who wants to move it. So we have till, we planned this till noon. We could probably go a little later if we needed to, but we have till then to figure out what's going to go in this draft report. We've made some public easement and private way progress today and private roads. I'm going to suggest one more item that we might want to think about with regard to public easements. I think, the idea is to try to get rid of confusion in state law. And right now, if I were a game warden and somebody told me, stop that ATV or stop that snowmobile, and we're on a public easement, I'm gonna have a hard time knowing whether I can or can't. And the reason for it is this: remember, the public easements are the leftovers if there's been a discontinuance of a town way, or if there's been a statutory abandonment. Towns have spent money for 30 consecutive years, and if, as of the end of that 30-year period, it's presumed to have the same, it's a presumed abandonment, has the same status as discontinuance. Problem is, if you look at the presumed abandonment statute, now it says that it has this, a public easement, but can't be used by, can only be used by motor vehicles, can't be used by snowmobiles and ATVs. So if I have a public easement that has arisen because of statutory abandonment after 2018, can't operate an ATV and I can't operate a snowmobile on that. If I have a public easement that's been laid out for cultivated lands to a public way after 1995, I don't think it applies to all the others. I think it's just that because it says this section in 3022. Then I can't use an ATV and I can't use a snowmobile. But on all other public easements, I can use those. Is that tenable? I understand the reason is to preserve the public easement, that people repair at their own expense from being chopped up by the ATV, from having snowmobiles come over your street Is there another way to do that? And I guess that's why I'd asked the Title 12 committee to take a look at that. If the issue is, if there's an issue about ATVs and snowmobiles on public easements, it's probably on all public easements. And so maybe the place to fix it is not in Title 23, where you have 4 different ways to create a public easement, but it's where you have snowmobile regulation and ATV regulation to say thou shalt not operate on a public easement unless you have the permission of the municipality that holds the public access. Or I think Roberta might differ and say the landowner who owns the public access, and you can have that discussion. But does that all make sense?
It does to me, to a point. My confusion is what Rebecca sent, and this is where I'm struggling. We're combining the ATV access route issue with the discontinued roads issue, and I maintain to this point that they aren't the same. And when we start changing the ATV access route process because of the discontinued roads process, what we're going to end up doing is screwing them both up. And frankly, I saw Roberta's comments about they shouldn't be able to authorize use on non-paved town roads. Well, that's what the majority of the ATV access routes are. So that will close them all over the state if we went that route. And I mean, that wasn't what they told us to look at, and I don't think that's the intent, but what I'm seeing of these drafts going around now appears to take us to the point where we'll end up losing more than we gain, because we're combining the two, and they're not the same. The ATV access routes were only designed, same as snowmobile, to be able to designate use of roads that were otherwise illegal to use, which is the public maintained portion of road for regular vehicle travel. And the only way you can ride on that is for the purposes of crossing up to 1,500 yards, or if the town or MDOT or county, depending on who's in charge, authorizes them as an access route. The discontinued town roads, public easements, are a completely different animal. And when we combine these two together, we're going down the wrong road, in my opinion.
And also, this too, with I've said this before, but ATVs have a higher standard of access than snowmobiles. And what I've always questioned is who is, like Jim said, who is as a game warden, if I see a ATV on a discontinued road with a public easement, I'll use it for example, Madison has one. And we received complaints from a neighbor that said that they're riding into the farm field and there's a public easement. Well, as a game warden, I'm looking to the town who has a public easement as a person to give permission to the people of the town to ride that. That's a designated ATV trail or not. And I mean, I'm not saying that it's right or wrong, but who is the person that is giving that permission for the people to use it? I don't know. And that's what, like Jim said, it's hard for us in the field to know who that is. I mean, Roberta's road, if there was an ATV riding up and down and you and your neighbors all called in and said, hey, there's an ATV riding up and down, they're not supposed to be here, we'd probably address the issue because it's not an ATV trail. But then you have the issue of, well, Roberta gave permission to the guy down the road and he comes through and he's riding there. Is that okay to do that? I don't know. Because on the instant, like a lot of locations, it's one single landowner that gives permission or doesn't, and there's abuse on the land and we can deal with that. But in an instance like that where there's an easement, it's very difficult to enforce.
I agree that snowmobiles and ATVs are different as far as what they need for the road. Snowmobiles generally do not cause a problem for the condition of the road because they're riding on top of the snow. The only problem that we do run into with snowmobiles generally is when it's a plowed road.
Yep.
And the snowmobile is operating on that. And that's where I say that snowmobiles should be allowed unless the road is plowed. And if the road is plowed, they should have permission of whoever it is that's keeping.
They're not allowed to
it.
ride on a plowed road anyway. It's,
Well,
it's
this-
right in statute that says you can't ride on a plowed road unless it's a designated trail.
There is something in there that says that, the public road plowed privately without reimbursement from the town. Closed roads, I know the term closed comes from the, closed to winter maintenance, which you would presume would be a road that isn't plowed. But if somebody lives on it and they're plowing it privately, then
I think you're
That's
gonna get a
where
lot of
there's a problem.
pushback from, like camp owners and stuff like that wanna ride down a plowed road and get to the lake to ice fish, cause that's like it's a big thing. People jump off their camp road and drive down a plowed road, but
there's one situation in.
Would it be possible to have a default the other way? I'm sorry for interjecting, but I've been trying to get in there, but instead of a default where they're automatically excluded from all the public easements, how about they're all included, that they're allowed to go, both of them, snow sleds and ATVs on these old roads, whatever. Maybe with the caveat that they would have to be club members, ATV club members, sticker holders, or some other standard. But to me, you keep on mentioning that snow sleds are not as bad as ATVs. I happen to disagree from a wildlife perspective. I don't want people establishing coyote highways where I don't want them to, right? But ATVs around here in the back settlement roads, the old road, these abandoned, semi-abandoned roads or whatever. I'm a motorcyclist. I would do more damage with my motorcycle than an ATV. A lot of people, that's what they do around here. They drive the back roads with an ATV. It would certainly make it easier from the perspective of enforcement, but I'd be interested to find out from Brian or others there what your thoughts on something like that would be. We're more of an inclusive. Everybody was allowed to, unless stated otherwise or somehow otherwise adopted. As by default, yes.
I'd almost say that, the default should have something about, where the road is used for residential purposes. That maybe where it is used for residential purpose, that it could be a snowmobile or ATV trail only by permission of the landowners.
I don't think that I think that if there's a public easement, I think that the public has a right to, have a vested interest in it.
I kind of like his idea about, what do you say, registered members of the ATV club? Because usually it's the road riders that are the big problem, the ones that aren't members of the ATV club.
Yeah, I would, like, for example, up here in Irving Land, you've got to have a sticker. It doesn't matter which club you belong to, but you have to have a sticker on where they allow ATVs. So if we say that it has to be a current registered ATV with a club membership or something like that.
I'll kind of interject there a little bit. So the statute says that they have to be registered unless they're on their own property anyway. That's all they have to have. Having a sticker from Irving is unenforceable. It's not enforceable. If a landowner requires you to have, like, they can say that you have to wear a Pink Panther outfit to go hunting on their property. And if they do that, you can't go there. But we can't enforce that. So a sticker from a landowner is a great thing if that's what they want to do, but it's not enforceable. So the registration is enforceable.
Yeah, I was using that as an example of Irving is the easement. Irving is the easement. Okay, so you can use your ATV on that easement. You just have to make sure that you have those other standards. You belong to a club, and your machine is legal.
Right.
So that's what I was trying to say.
Brian and John can probably talk about it a little bit more, but like I know in New Hampshire, they have in Vermont, they have trail passes, which they require by law in addition to the registration. But I don't think that that's ever, like, we've talked about it here, but I don't know if Brian knows the history behind that, but it didn't go anywhere.
No, it didn't. I mean, honestly, it should have, but it never did. And I think that horse left the barn centuries ago. But it wouldn't matter anyway, because in my mind, just, and I'm probably wrong, but I think the default already is that you can go. Because unless this is a recent public easement that specifically prohibits ATVs, the way the law's been interpreted, they can go. But in many cases, they're doing that in locations, they aren't trails. So a trail pass wouldn't accomplish something anyway. Now, in some cases, they are trails, but there's a lot of this riding going on in these scenarios out there. And as you point out, Chris, you can't do any enforcement on it because the status is very much unclear. And the status of how, what is the specifics of said road is unclear. So I agree that trying to make the status on all of these the same would make it much easier for the public. It would make it much easier for law enforcement and the people that live there. The question is going to be, how do we get there? Because if, when we talked about this 2 or 3 weeks ago, or whatever it was, she pointed out several scenarios where, what we originally were going to do was say, you can't be there, period, unless you have landowner permission, and just try to stay consistent. But then you got people that are abutters who aren't the landowners, but they're abutters. And now all of a sudden, because they don't get along with the landowner, they can't even access their own property. So that's the problem has been every time we try to fix one thing, we break 3 others.
So in other words, by making it default that they would be permitted would be closer to what's currently happening anyway, because the minority are the other easements, right?
Right.
So this would be less of a shakeup to folks that use their ATVs and snow sleds like they do, at least up here. And I think that personally, that's what I'd recommend.
I agree with you, except that we don't address Roberta's problem and other people's problems, Swome's problem, or anybody else with regards to somehow mandating maintenance. It's one thing for us to, if we're going to have the right to use it, I would argue that we have a responsibility to help maintain it. Currently, that isn't the case. And in some cases, we've had towns, Chris is aware, this year alone, who've actually pushed back when we tried to help the club and the town. They wouldn't even allow it because of the existing law and how they interpret it. So addressing that somehow.
But we are fixing those things, though. We are fixing those things to allow the towns and the public to participate with reduced liability and maybe some compensation and some. That's what we're doing, I believe, is that we're building that flexibility, right?
Well, I hope so, but I'm not convinced of that because of the minimum standard thing. I don't know. That's my
the minimum
argument.
standard road. Yeah, the minimum standard road thing is another thing. But again, and I understand maybe it's hard to build the clubs into it, but I can guarantee you the best thing that I would ever recommend to a landowner up here is to allow the ATV club to do their thing where they want them. If they want to exclude sensitive areas for privacy or wildlife, whatever, but they are very good with organization and maintenance, as you have mentioned, I think before, Brian. So if we have that partnership, but I think that's a secondary, that's a problem to fix. But I'm sure that if the public had a vote on it, they would want to allow it and allow for a little bit of more money or coordination for maintenance.
I do think Rebecca mentioned too, Brian was like we were privy to, and it's kind of in her notes, but without speaking for her, that was part of the problem. Was some of the issues that we've seen was the towns say that they can't accept the money from the ATV club or from Brian's group in order to do maintenance on the roads, which is hard for unless I don't really understand it. But she was saying that they can't accept that type of money, and we've seen that from pushback from the towns also.
Yeah, that's part of my confusion because I went through and looked at what she submitted, and again, her suggested changes, different than what I was originally looking at, goes at the ATV access route. And that's my problem, because the ATV access route, right, wrong, or otherwise, is working. And when you start changing it, and now all of a sudden you can't have an ATV access route, that's going to create a bigger problem. There's going to be a lot more pushback from businesses and everybody. Nothing will ever go anywhere. And I just think we need to keep the ATV access routes on roads that are being maintained separate from these discontinued roads. And we seem to be crossing that up, and that's just gonna end up with us getting nowhere.
But wouldn't that be up to like you folks and the club and the municipality? There certainly could be a section of easement, right now that might be incorporated. There might be opportunities. I'm sure they're always looking to expand their network of trail systems. To me, again, a good thing if you have this entity that takes care of the maintenance. I mean, that's to me is
but
really
it's not
great.
an access route. Access routes I can't maintain. They get no trail money, no signage, no insurance, no nothing, because an access route is maintained by a public entity and it's covered under tort claims, and we can't fund those. We can fund trails, roads, public roads. I know you guys call them trails, but they're not. The discontinued roads, we've always funded both snowmobile and ATV as trail, because the towns aren't maintaining them. What worries me in this whole process is we're going to end up in a scenario where we won't be able to fund trail maintenance, snowmobile or ATV on these discontinued roads either, if we're not careful, because we're crossing them up. And that's my big fear right now. We got to keep these separate. The Discontinued Roads Commission was not told to deal with ATV access routes or snowmobile access routes. And I don't know. I think it's a big mistake for us to keep going there.
What do you suggest?
Well, I just don't think we should mess with the access route law. If we're going to mess with the discontinued roads, then fine. And if we, at one point I said, let's just remove that paragraph. I don't know right off the top of my head, Chris, what it was, paragraph 8 or whatever the heck, that stipulates in the existing law that these discontinued roads are in fact open to ATVs and snowmobiles. And maybe we need to pull ATVs out of that. But Rebecca was concerned about that because that creates other problems. And so that's kind of how we got to where we are. But I think that's the underlying issue.
Do you think we should pull the ATVs out of that?
Well, I thought
yourself
back in 2004, we passed a law that said you can't operate an ATV off your own land unless you either have permission of the landowner or you're on a designated ATV trail where permission has been acquired, which is what we maintain over 3,000 landowner permits that clubs provide or we get directly that stipulate that you have permission to be here, which allows us to fund them. And this one section of law kind of supersedes that because it's technically allowing ATV use on a road without necessarily the landowner's permission. And so I said, well, let's just default back to what we said originally, which is you got to have landowner permission. But there was concerns by MMA about that. So
that's always been my question after that is who is the one that you get permission from? Because who is the actual landowner on discontinued road?
And I think that all depends on the road, right?
Well,
it depends on the status of the easement, whether there's been a court case, whether there's been a ruling. I mean, as you saw, we've had very clear disagreements. We got towns that claim they own it, and then we got towns that don't. We got towns that say they have an easement, they're not the owner, but their easement allows the use, so we can't stop the use, and the owner can't stop the use. And those are That's the crux of the problem.
If there's a
I
public.
personally think we should have landowner permission or we should have a butter permit. I have consistently over the last, I don't know however many years, told clubs, avoid this fight, just go work with the abutters, figure out what everybody needs to be happy, and let's make them happy. The problem is, in some areas, they've done that and it's worked. In some areas, they just gave the finger and went and did whatever they wanted to because they didn't like the landowner, or the landowner didn't like them, and the town told them they could go. And then in some cases, the towns got actively in the middle of it and said, you can't even help them do that. We're not putting any money into it because if we do, that makes us liable and now we got to maintain it forever. So those are the three results that we keep running into.
Okay. If there's a
Thank
public easement, there's a public right of access. And that public right of access is protected, managed, administered by the municipality. It doesn't, the municipality doesn't have to be maintaining the way. But if I went out there and did something to block public access, the municipality would be saying, no, you can't, going off to court and would win. So who would give permission in that instance to someone to ride a snowmobile or an ATV down that public easement?
I've had town managers, I've had selectmen,
But it would be the town.
I've had budding landowners.
They may own it, but they don't, but they can't control the
And that's
right of
my question is,
access.
who is the one that we are, like, who can give permission?
Yeah.
I guess that's,
Now, here you come into access by what means though, because the town of Fayette versus Mantor, the court said unfettered right of access, which kind of means anything goes, and we've seen that, we've seen people think that that means you can use it as a skid road and drag your logs down it, which ruins it for everybody else. So we don't think that was what was originally meant by it. And that clause about use by motor vehicle, I think doesn't apply to just the recent establishment of roads, as you said, for a farm or a mill or whatever. Because the roads originally that were laid out as private ways for the owner of improved land, back when that law was in, that law dates back to the early 1800s, and we didn't have ATVs and log skidders and things like that back then. So I don't think that it was a new restriction. I think it was something that was kind of assumed, and when people started expanding the right into things that weren't supposed to be used there or weren't expected to be used there, then they had to put in a clause saying, no, those aren't supposed to be there. So I think that should apply to any of those private ways that were laid out for the landowner. Now, whether that gets into public easements that were held when a road was discontinued, you might be able to argue that. But I think the safer way to go is to say that they're not allowed except by landowner permission, and it should be by the owner of the land, not the owner of the easement over the land, because they're the ones that are going to be damaged by it if the ATV club is not being responsible.
I guess that's the confusion I have is I think that if a town has an easement over there, they're also the owner of the land. The public,
No, they're not the owner of the land, they're only the owner of the easement over the land.
I mean,
But
it's a
that easement is a public easement.
hovercraft.
Yeah.
It's not a
That's the
private
thing, it's an
easement. It's not an individual easement. It's a public easement. So
Right,
now you're saying the public easement carries no value or what?
That's
No, it's a
right.
public easement for travel by motor vehicle. Right. Or actually, it says by foot or motor vehicle.
Or by horse.
Does that count as feet?
Skidoo.
Yeah.
So I can take my Chevy pickup, but I can't take my ATV.
which is so
And I
crazy.
can't
I
take
mean,
my
like,
snowmobile because the snowmobile is explicitly excluded as a motor vehicle.
Right.
And I think the snowmobiles should be included because
We don't want
they don't
that.
do much damage. And a lot of discontinued roads that aren't used for residential access are used for snowmobile trails. We actually like having the snowmobile trail out just beyond our house because it makes a nice place for my husband to walk his service dog. There's a big 2-mile loop he can make.
We have a lot of members, like, I mean, MSA can talk about it a little bit more, but there's a lot of snowmobile club members that don't ride snowmobiles. There's fat tire bike members, there's snowshoers, there's skiers, because just like you said, they appreciate, and ATV clubs too, they join because they like to ride the trails, like they understand the maintenance of it, and
And my husband is actually a member of the local snowmobile club, and he goes out and does a lot of trail maintenance, but he says he's not the member, the dog is.
unspoken.
Well, this, one of the areas where this comes into play is what we call section 3022, and this talks about how a municipality lays out a public easement to go from cultivated land to a public way. Statutes are generally prospective in nature and not retroactive. So when this was amended relatively recently to say, notwithstanding any other provision of this chapter, public easements laid out under this section are limited to rights of access by foot or motor vehicle as defined in Title 29A, which excludes snowmobiles. Then I see that as not applying to all the old private ways that had ever been laid out from 1821 up until 1976 or 1995 when this was added, but only to those since then. And then we have the 2018 change to the abandonment by statute law saying those public easements also are limited to rights by access by foot or motor vehicle. So you have all those discontinued ways, all those previously statutorily abandoned ways where you can operate them. All I'm suggesting is there ought to be one rule. I don't particularly care which, that ATVs and snowmobiles are allowed or they're not, but there ought to be one rule instead of two different types of public easements out there that would confuse folks in the field who are trying to just do the right thing and enforce it. And if allowing them creates a burden to public easement owners who are maintaining the way, then maybe it's restrictions on where you use a snowmobile or an ATV globally. Say, no, not to cut back on routes, not to cut back on access routes, not to cut back on trails, but just say, thou shalt not operate on any public easement anywhere established unless you have, as has been suggested, town meeting approval or the legislative body approval. And as a public process, people can go get that allowed.
We actually buy public easements for ATVs. So now you're saying that those public easements we still wouldn't be able to use?
Well, are you buying what we call statutorily public easements, or are these other agreements?
Well, they're public easements across landowners.
You're laying them out. You couldn't be laying out public easements because you're not the municipality. So I don't know what you're purchasing. You're purchasing easements maybe, but they're not a class of road.
You're talking about buying an easement across private land, not along a discontinued road?
Well, they're not discontinued roads. They're on private roads.
Okay, that doesn't
That's
run
different.
afoul. That's different.
As was mentioned though, if you ban ATVs, the people that would be using them are going to use four-wheel drive pickup trucks, and it's going to do more damage.
Well, I think we're not talking about banning ATVs. We're talking about making sure that where they are used is where they have permission to be used.
Which is the law anyway.
I guess the question is this: Are there people who build on and live on and use public easements who use ATVs to get to their land, whether it's woodland or whether it's their house, that use snowmobiles to get to their house and need to have that as part of their access? So we shouldn't be banning it.
I do know one case in Rumford where there's a whole sort of complex of subdivision roads. And it says right in the deeds that they are to be accessed by snowmobile in the winter. And we ran across a problem one year when somebody new bought one of the lots and wanted to plow it. And everybody else was up in arms because they depend on having access by
It's
snowmobile.
actually funny, Roberta, so I ran into what's the road across from the elementary school in Fayette, goes up to the
So, Surrey Road?
Surrey Road.
Yeah.
So I went went up there the other day during deer season, talked to a landowner, he bought a house a half a mile up in.
Mhm.
He's gonna live up there, and I was like, well, how are you gonna get in the winter? I was like, they don't plow the road, what are you gonna do? Oh, the snowmobile trail grooms it, he's like, I can drive right over it with my motor vehicle, he's like, it's really, really good. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, I go, well, you can't drive a motor vehicle on a snowmobile trail, it's against the law.
Mm.
But he has a right of way to go up in there. So I'm sitting there kind of contemplating that and I go, well, I don't know. And there again, like Jim was saying, I'm sitting there from an enforcement aspect of it, because as soon as he ruts it up with his truck going up in there, the snowmobile club's gonna be mad. But he has a right of way to get up, he has an easement to get in there.
Mhm.
And I'm like, so I don't know, he should, I mean, he's like, I don't mind walking, but he's like, it's such a good trail that I can drive my truck up on it.
When it's frozen, yeah, but when
Right.
it's
But what's to
35
stop it?
degrees. He's got a right.
Getting into this, Chris, a few years ago down east, and the ruling that came down basically said that he had the right of way, they couldn't stop it, and the snowmobile club actually, they got all mad, but in the end they closed the trail and relocated the trail because they couldn't stop him from driving on it. But then he complained because now he no longer had a trail, so he had to plow it, but that was the outcome. It turned into a big mess. Everybody lost.
And that's it, like, I mean, in the end, really, everybody, they win, like Steve was saying, everybody usually wins from these trail systems some way or another. I mean, there obviously are situations where there's some bad that comes out of them, but the majority of the time, it's a good thing. It isn't always a bad thing.
Where there's a 66-foot wide right of way, as there is on Surrey Road, seems like it ought to be possible to fit both a vehicular road and a snowmobile trail side by side. Although I do know one town where the people who live there and own both sides of the road, I didn't want a trail going through. They didn't want the noise going within a few yards of their house. And so the town came in and mowed down all the trees for the 66-foot wide right of way and said, we're gonna use that. And then continued using the road because what they had cleared was too rough.
Is this Brooks or Monroe?
Jackson.
Oh, Jackson, that's the one.
Yeah.
Right next to it, yeah.
So where are we going with this?
So, I mean, the bottom line is when they put this bill in before, as I recall, they tried to make it retro and the legislature did what they did because they wouldn't make it retro. That's why they're not the same. So, I mean, I think we need to look into that because, I mean, it does make sense for all of these easements to be treated the same, but I don't think the legislature had the stomach for it because they didn't want to pass the new ones giving unlimited ATV access, but they also didn't want to go back and change pre-existing law. Maybe they will come to that, but I question if they will.
Well, if it already says that ATV trails have to be by landowner permission, can we solve the problem by just clarifying who the landowner is? Who can give that permission?
Except on easements, right, Brian? Because the public easement says that they're allowed to.
Right, unless we read that section of law that says they can use those, that supersedes the other, the way I see it.
Right, that's where I'm kind of coming in, like, so it allows them to use the public easement.
So where does it say they're allowed to use the public easement?
Where is that, Brian? Do you know?
Oh, right off the top of my head, I don't. It's in that section of ATV law in Title 12. There's one chapter there that, I mean, one section that allows use of those. So that's what I remember. I originally said, let's just remove that because it kind of conflicts with the landowner liability law. But Rebecca had a fairly lengthy reason why that wouldn't work and why they would oppose that.
Yeah, 1315. I think it's one, yeah, it is. It's 13157.
Okay, actually, Roberta pointed out something that I went back to take a look at the footnote in Fayette v. Manter, which is a state Supreme Court case. And there's a footnote which says the parties agree that a private way subject to gates and bars is the legal equivalent of a public easement. I think one of the parties no longer agrees.
We didn't agree then, we
Okay.
agreed that that's what the law
Okay,
said.
well, the court said the parties agreed. The parties also agree that when a town discontinues a road and retains a public easement, the public has an unfettered right of access over that road, but the town has no maintenance responsibility. So the idea of putting restraints on an unfettered right of access, if indeed there is one, it sounds like reasonable people can differ. If the public has an unfettered right of access, then why are we restraining ATVs and snowmobiles? But the other side of the coin is, you could say that they are prohibited, but doesn't it make sense if you have a term called public easement, even if you arrive at it different ways, it's one class of road? Shouldn't the same rights exist on all public easements, no matter how they're created? And if the idea was that it be an unfettered right, then there shouldn't be any restriction in the definition of public easement on ATVs and snowmobiles.
But couldn't
You
the,
could put a regulation on it under ATVs and snowmobiles and say, you know, if you're operating on these public easements, you've got to first get permission or something, but the permission goes for trails. If Jim decides to go operate an ATV, I'm not gonna go talk to the Fayette town meeting
No,
about
the only
asking
place
whether.
that you're allowed to operate an ATV without landowner permission is your own property. Anywhere else, you're in violation of state
Okay.
law.
So,
But this is-
Except for these public easements.
Right, and that's where I was just looking, so Brian, I think you're referring to 13157 sticks, where are we here?
Yeah, I apologize. My folder for all of this is in the office and I'm not there, so I don't have it, but.
It says an ATV may be operated on a public way that is not maintained or used for the operation of conventional motor vehicles, except that operation on the left side of the way is prohibited during the hours from sunset to sunrise. That's what you're referring to, I'm assuming, right?
That's what's always caused, that's what they default back to.
Okay, but there's the key, is not maintained for motor vehicles, right? What was it you said there?
It says.
Right, but that's the whole point, Roberta. You're saying they're not maintaining your road, so they're not maintaining it for motor vehicles, so therefore it's open to ATVs.
The town isn't maintaining it for by motor vehicles, but that isn't what it says, is it? Read that again.
It says, an ATV may be operated on a public way that is not maintained or used for the operation of conventional motor vehicles.
Okay.
Except that the operation, which I would argue with, I would say that Brian is correct in saying that an old discontinued county road, which we've seen a lot of your pictures where there are big ruts and
Right.
grass is growing right up over, that's not maintained for a conventional motor vehicle.
That's not the problem. The problem is where you have a piece of road that is being used and maintained, albeit by the private landowners, for access to a residence. So if it's being used and maintained for motor vehicles, then that should prohibit the ATVs on that piece of road, correct? Isn't that what that says?
Well,
I
our
don't think
minimum,
I think so. I
our,
mean, it's always been interpreted, it's not being maintained, therefore they can use them. Just
But our-
like
for example,
if
our-
they don't,
our-
you know, like
sorry.
what is it, John, 139 or whatever over in the White Mountain National Forest. The MDOT doesn't maintain it for vehicles in the wintertime, so we can snowmobile on it. Technically, actually, we don't tell the public this, but you can ATV on it.
so under 6D, do you have a list of public ways that are not maintained?
Right, that was my problem.
What?
It put there, a public way that is not maintained.
Right.
By whom? Or used for the operation of conventional motor vehicles? Doesn't say by
Yeah.
the
Is
public,
it
by
maintained by
private.
the public or is it maintained by the manor?
I think also too, you have to read, like, I mean, and this deep dives into this, but I mean, I think the way Title 12 is interpreting that, because Title 12 is saying like, I mean, this could be, like a logging road of some sort, or like the public has a way to get in there. ATVs operate like, oh,
I think that's the key right there, is that if it's being maintained and used by motor vehicles, then that should prohibit ATVs unless maybe by specific permission. But, if it's a part of the road that is not being used are maintained for motor vehicles.
I think that, Brian's not wrong, like if that was taken out, I think. So that that's not even in there, and then it was just defaulted back to. You have to have landowner permission in order to operate an ATV, it would fall back to that.
But then if you're gonna do that, you've got to define
Right.
who the
Like
landowner is.
on an easement, who that is, who do you get permission from?
Right.
I'm gonna suggest that we're not gonna get this issue resolved in time for this bill. Because every time we get to one layer, we get to another layer. This might be more than we can bite off for this bill. Does that sound fair? I don't mean to foreclose anything here, but we've got, 20 minutes in our regularly allotted time, and what do you?
I think this is, personally, I think this is the most important, issue that I would have to deal with representing, people up here and, cause this is it has big implications. Definitely don't want to skip over it for sure. And so whatever you think is fair for time.
Steve, let me ask this question. How many people have come up to you and said that they're having problems trying to figure out which public easements they can take ATVs down?
Every day.
Really? Okay.
It's
Well-
literally like nonstop.
Oh,
Well, the thing is though, you see
Okay.
a lot of up here. You see a lot of ATVs driving down the secondary roads and in the back and all that. And they seem to be allowed to do so. And if that changes, that would upset people. I think that's the big thing.
I think the problem too, Jim, is that like Roberta was mentioning the Jackson one, like we have all these they just keep coming and coming and coming and coming. And we have no answer for them because a lot of them are civil. And we're saying, listen, I can't give you an answer. I don't have the answer. Like, I don't know who owns it. And there's no resolve. A lot of them, we try to get the clubs or work with Brian or Joe Higgins and say, hey, listen, try to reroute the trail. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But obviously a lot of these discontinued or abandoned county roads, they're great access. They're a perfect corridor for these trails. So it is the easiest route.
How about this? I'm just throwing it out there. If a public easement is open to unfettered public access, as the state Supreme Court has said, and I recognize people take issue with that, but if that's the case, unfettered means without restriction.
So you can use a tank or a hovercraft or.
That's right. We could use the Abrams tank or something and go down there. But at any rate, not to be facetious about too much, but it is unfettered public access on a public easement. Then we should remove the restrictions on public easement definition of saying, well, it can't be anything other than a motor vehicle. It has to be a motor vehicle. Instead, just unfettered access under the public easement definition. And then if there are reasonable restrictions that you want to place on snowmobile, ATVs, whatever, that would require landowner permission, no matter whether it's a private road or a public easement or whatever, put them there, put them in Title 12 in 13157A. And there, you could also specify who you get the permission from, the landowner, or in the case of a public easement, maybe it's the landowner. You go with Roberta's suggestion. Maybe it's the municipal legislative body, and you go with Rebecca's suggestion. If we're going to solve the problem, I think that might be the better way to go.
I think what it boils down is we need two definitions. One is who is the landowner? And the other definition we need is maintained by whom? In other words, if the road is maintained by the private landowner, does that count as a road that's maintained and used by motor vehicles? Or does it have to be maintained by the town, in which case all these ones that are privately maintained are open to ATV use? If you can say, if it's maintained and used by motor vehicle, even if it's private, private maintenance, private use, then that would solve that issue. And if you can say the landowner is the owner of the land, not the owner of the easement, then that would solve that issue.
Okay, so who you get permission from would be dependent upon who maintains the public easement.
Yeah.
Is that basically?
Yeah, that might work.
A dumb question here, but on these discontinued roads, who pays the taxes on them? Anybody?
Well, it's part of the ownership of the abutting land you own to the center line. Unless it's grantor reserve title.
And I know Rebecca says that, there's something in the tax assessment laws that says that they're supposed to discount if somebody lives on a discontinued road. But most of the people we talk to say that isn't happening. They're getting assessed just the same as somebody on a public road. And they're told there is no discount for being on a discontinued road.
And assessment practice can vary from town to town. They all take direction from the state tax assessor, but they don't get to that granular usually. So the idea,
And you were thinking about permission from whoever maintained the road, but if nobody's maintaining the road, who do you get the permission from? I mean, it was a bad, it's discontinued because.
Then it's not a maintained road and you don't need permission.
or you
If the
can't.
ATV club is maintaining the road, they can give themselves permission?
Well, the ATV may be operated in a public way that is not maintained under certain circumstances, for use of those, of motor vehicles. I don't know,
I'm just
but
reading this and I'm like, I mean, I know what Brian does for improvements to ATV trails, and then you start getting, it would make it so that you could use a conventional motor vehicle on it. So it is maintained for a conventional motor vehicle,
Yeah.
the way he maintains it.
And we've always allowed money to be spent to maintain on discontinued roads because town's not maintaining them. If and when the town is actually maintaining them for regular motor vehicles, under the direction that I've always been given based on the AG's ruling way back when and risk management and everybody else, is we wouldn't be able to help maintain them in that scenario.
okay, this wouldn't change it, but this would just say who you get permission from as an ATV operator in order to operate on it.
I mean, I generally agree with the concept that easements ought to all be the same, but I also am pretty sure that the legislature did not agree with that concept the last time around. And this is going to mean that we're going to tell the state and local legislative committee to change one section of law, and then we're going to go tell the IF&W committee or the ACF committee to change another section of law because of the law change that the state and local did. And I just listened to what I just said, and I know where this is all going to end up. It's all going to be a mess.
Well, the change that was made to the public easement provision may have been because of people in this room or interests represented by folks in this room. So we can explain it. The idea is to restore public easements back to the unfettered access that the state Supreme Court said they have.
Right.
And then if you need
Which
to
does
control,
make sense.
but if you need to control ATV operation on those public easements, then go to the person who does the maintenance work and ask for permission.
So I mean, if you change the public easement back to just unfettered access, but then said something, applicable to Title 12, whatever section, state law, would that accomplish that? Then we wouldn't have to pass another law. It would just point to the landowner permission requirement that already exists under ATV.
Except for snowmobiles.
No, you'd want to go back and
Snowmobiles, if you didn't do that, it doesn't hurt snowmobiles. They're now allowed to use, and they don't have to have any special permission,
That's
which
what I'm
they
saying.
don't need now. So we haven't changed that.
landowner on there, it's still the first landowner, a budding landowner complains about the snowmobile that just went down through their road. And then they can't do anything about it because it's not posted. And they have a right to go through there.
Well, the reality is this, I mean, John can argue with me if I'm wrong, but as far as I know, we don't have any maintained snowmobile trails out there that don't have landowner permission. We don't fund them. Joe doesn't fund them. I mean, they have to have landowner permission to get funding, even though the law doesn't necessarily require that. On the ATV side, obviously the law requires it, so I literally have to verify all the landowner permission, which on snowmobile side, club tells them they've got permission. That's, that's good enough, unless something comes up and somebody says, I never gave permission, and then we have to go from there, but.
Town of Jackson. There's a snowmobile trail going within a few yards of somebody's house. They own both sides of the road. They do not want the snowmobile trail there. They posted proper signs. I sent a letter to the snowmobile club. And the town said, baloney, we're going through anyway.
So I checked with the scheduling. The room is free until 2. So we're okay to 2.
Okay.
If we need to run over.
Do we want to continue past 12?
What do you see for objectives that we can get in on our report?
All right, I think.
We're making you're making some good progress on this one right now. This would be great if, and I liked your last suggestion, Jim, and I like where you're going right now.
Well, I think we've probably driven down this path about as far as we can. It's probably time to put something to paper and react on this one. I think there's some general direction to, okay, we could do unfettered access for public easements if we had some protections, and those protections would be under ATVs at least, maybe not so much snowmobiles because they don't seem to be the problem for public easement use. And so I think I have an idea of where you want to go with getting permission for those public easements from the party who's doing the maintenance.
My only fear with that, Jim, is,
Go ahead.
I'm just thinking back to when it first started, and they probably said ATVs aren't a problem,
Right.
and here we are, and we're saying ATVs, so we're saying now snowmobiles aren't a problem, but I'm just trying to think in the future as to
Sure.
where we're going here. That's my only suggestion.
Couldn't you also say, when you're talking about unfettered access, that it doesn't necessarily mean literally anything, that it means the typical use or the traditional use of the road that was turned into a public easement, that,
Easement use can change over time.
I just think
With
they're,
circumstances.
I think they're,
Unfettered sounds a little open-ended.
It is.
To me.
yeah.
Like I
And
say,
I-
where you had a road that was built by your horse with a tip cart and you got a bunch of guys with shovels, and now you're expecting it to sustain the kind of traffic we have today.
And that can happen. Municipalities will give building permits to people who have bought land cheaply on those roads, and next thing you know, there are houses, and it's grown up, things have changed.
It's like saying unfettered is dangerous.
Right.
But it's what the
It's
state
pretty
Supreme Court
vague.
said, and
It's too vague.
well, I can't go back and ask that justice what he or she meant, did you really mean to be that broad?
What, 1987 was it they made that
Yeah, back
decision?
there, yes,
We didn't have so many ATVs then. We had snowmobiles.
yeah,
Yeah, that's
these,
true.
these things do change.
We had ATVs back then. The ATVs came in the 70s.
There weren't as many
So-
of them.
The program started in 83, 85. They passed the legislation in 83. So, but I mean, as we pointed out, the bigger problem, and we've already seen it, particularly during COVID, is going to be the trucks and Jeeps and everything else, because we're seeing that. That's why, and Chris can attest to this, we're seeing so many landowners start to gate because we've got a law in the books that we can close ATVs and enforce it during mud season, but then they just turn around and go with trucks. And nobody's been willing to pass a law on that, so now the landowners are gating the road.
We actually just had a recent issue that we charge the person for driving around the gate. There's no posted signs and, they failed to prosecute them because they said that wasn't, there was no signage there.
Yeah.
And I'm like, does the
Gate, so the
lane
gate
not go
wasn't
there?
sufficient?
Well, anecdotally, the biggest problem I seem to see on the highways that people driving huge trucks, it's right on the bumper of everybody else, but we can't ban trucks.
I know.
So, or we can't regulate just a class of big trucks or something like that. So how about this? I'll try putting together something that we can react to. And if it isn't ready for prime time by the end of our next meeting, then we'll put it in the parking lot for next year. But I understand it's a priority. So let me try to put something together. And if some of you have ideas or any of you have ideas on this, let me know and see. But I think the idea is let's keep public easement, take away any restrictions there, place them on the uses, on the snowmobiles, ATVs, whatever it is that's chewing up the road. And see what we can do there. Does that make sense? I'll give it a try and I'll gladly accept any contributions you have. We'll give that a try though to see if we can get that into this installment. As far as the rest of the report goes, and a lot of this we looked at previously, and the public way part, the definition of way, which wasn't asked of the legislature, but it's a pretty fundamental term since it shows up in all of the other terms. That seemed to be okay and didn't need any change. The definition of public way, we're saying we'll keep it as it is, where it is, even if it's in its different areas, because it may be defined differently for particular chapters, but doesn't seem to be causing confusion. That doesn't seem to be the problem. So way, public way, and roadway public roadway don't seem to be problems. So I think if we're all in agreement there, then the issues are going to be private way, private road, and public easement. We've talked about what we're willing to talk about for private way today. We talked about public easement today. I think I have direction enough from the commission to be able to draft those changes and put them into the report for you to look at. Question is under private road. That's the number 4, private road. There was a bill that was passed by the legislature this past session, or within the past year, allowing Wyndham, as I think we've talked about, the town of Wyndham, to plow roads in Wyndham that are camp roads. And people for years have been screaming, hey, I pay taxes here. I want my camp road plowed. These are all camp roads around the lake. And what the town had said is, well, look, we can't spend public money to plow private property. But if you want to sign this piece of paper that says that you acknowledge that this is a way that the town can plow, then maybe over 20 years or so it will become a public easement or whatever. The legislature authorized Wyndham to say that, but it mixed up, as it always seems to do, the concepts of private road and private way, and said you can plow these private ways. Well, no, they're not private ways. That's the problem. If they were private ways, they'd be public easements, and we could go out there and plow them as a town. But they're not. They're private roads.
But they're declaring them to be public easements. And that has some people up in arms because they don't really want the public.
And I don't want to go there, but it shows how the legislature isn't at this late date using the right word. These are private roads. But they call them private ways, and they're not.
They have been private roads, but they're declaring them now to be public easements. And I did my best to make sure that they knew that meant that the public can go there. They're not likely too much because they're all dead ends that go nowhere, but they are going to be open to public use if they sign this thing saying they're now public easements.
So
that's the trade-off.
So the definitional change here is to try to make sure that we distinguish between a private road that's privately owned and privately controlled. Access is privately controlled on these private roads, and private ways that have become public easements. I think we're in agreement on that. I want someone to mark that on the calendar. No,
So
we
noted.
agree on a lot of things. I'm teasing, but so that's what the change is intended for here, to try to make sure that we keep these terms distinct. And so if that's, is this okay? These sections? Okay. So I think we've actually gotten a fair amount accomplished. If we are in agreement on changes that we're willing to recommend to the upcoming session on, you know, way and public way stay the same, private road, make this change to the state highway law to make sure we don't mess things up. And then we've got some things that we discussed today with regard to private ways and public easements, where we can make some changes that we can agree on and push forward. And I can try to clean up that dispute or that issue on ATVs, snowmobiles, and see if that's something that we can bring forward now. So if we can do all that, I think we're all right. I think we've got something that we can have for a report to look at in advance of December 19th. I will try like heck to get that out sooner than I did this time, and I'm sorry I didn't mean to back anyone up, but I was doing a lot of writing this weekend.
Yeah.
And,
You did really good work and we appreciate it.
well, thank you, but it's everyone's efforts and ideas that we're trying to get in here, so I appreciate everyone's input.
I think my only comments were on this paper.
Yeah.
And there were, most of them were,
Which one
was that, Roberta? The one that says 2023-12-6 draft proposed legislation, Roberta's comment. It's a 2-page and there's only a little bit on the second page.
And I'll work through these comments.
Yeah, there are just some minor changes. I think there's one place where you caught the term way in one place where it was in there in 2 places. You know, things like that.
I'm glad to have that second pair of eyes, believe me. So, okay, and I also have your comments on the memo and all of this. So I'm going to look through these because these arrived a little late while I was
Yeah.
driving this morning, and you know.
This has been a horrendous couple of weeks for me. My daughter was in the hospital and was recovering from surgery, and I had to go out and try to help her get ready for winter while we're getting us ready for winter and cutting firewood and clearing the road. And so I got to doing this a couple of days ago.
Understood.
I apologize for being so late.
It's all right. So with that, I think if that's okay with everyone, unless there's some additional comments or whatever, I think I've got my homework to do.
My one big thing that I have to say, or my husband will hang me when I get home, is what do we do about abandonment? And about keeping a public easement that is privately maintained and used by the public. And we still say that if we could get the Maine Supreme Court to give an opinion of the justices on whether it is constitutional to have a public road that is privately maintained, that would be huge. And that's kind of at the core of this whole commission is, you know, what do we do with these roads that are privately maintained and used by the public?
But wouldn't that be all public easements potentially? Whether they're discontinued, result from discontinuance or from abandonment?
Yep.
Okay.
Good.
And what do you, I'm sorry, I missed, what is the question that you want them to resolve?
Whether it is constitutional to have a public road that is privately maintained. Because if you have public use of a road and the public doesn't provide any maintenance, what's gonna happen to that road? Either somebody's got to maintain it, or it's not gonna be a passable road anymore because public use is gonna destroy it.
And
So
I guess I
you're
would,
either depriving the landowners of access, or you're requiring that they use their private funds to maintain a public road. And if you can't have public funds going for a private purpose, maintaining private roads, how can you have private funds going to a public purpose, maintaining a public?
That's a fiscal note.
and my counter argument is that because the law court has upheld the discontinuance and abandonment statutes as applied, they imply that these are constitutional.
But if you really dig into the decisions, which I have, believe me, You take, Lamb versus the town of New Sharon. The court upheld, having the road be abandoned. But if you read carefully, they don't say the fact that it was still going to be open to public use. In fact, they say in several places that the public has given up its rights on the road by not having done anything to it for 30 years. Well, if they've given up their rights on the road, that's not saying that the public still has all its rights on the road. It just doesn't have any responsibility anymore. And if you look at, again, Lamb versus New Sharon, they did use Jordan versus Canton as a precedent. They didn't say, oh, because this only refers to a law that's been repealed, it doesn't apply. They did look at it, but they said that that was different because the public was using the road and there was no process. Well, there isn't really any process in abandonment either. The only process is that in section 3028, they said that you could appeal to the Superior Court. Well, that's what Jordan did in Jordan versus Canton. So they didn't really add anything to it. They didn't really fix that appeals process. So if it's unconstitutional to have a limited user highway establish a public road with no public maintenance, why would it be constitutional to have abandonment say that it establishes a public road with no public maintenance?
And having written the brief for the town in the Lamb versus New Sharon case.
I didn't know that.
There is an argument on the other side that this is a constitutional statute, had been upheld, and that there is a public easement that retention of the public easement is different in kind from the old limited use highway under Canton. But the thing is, there are parties who can bring that up.
Actual consequences of governmental action, no matter what the statute is.
The problem is that that's an issue of constitutionality that's going to be raised by someone in the context of a case. I don't think this commission is going to ask the legislature to say there's a solemn occasion that justifies an opinion of the justices and we want your opinion on this. I don't.
So if we take it to court, does that mean I get kicked off the commission?
No, I don't think
That's not
so.
a conflict of interest?
The conflict of no, I don't think so. We'll deal with that when we get to it, but I don't see that as happening. You'd have your own.
Gonna be thrilled.
You'd have your own experience to bring to the fore. We wouldn't, because it's just an advisory board. I mean, in the end, we make recommendations. We don't make decisions. We don't affect
Going
anyone.
to court gets you kicked off. Probably Kathy Nato would be happy to go to court.
What was that? Sorry, I missed that.
Wow, that slipped my mind, Brian, but thank you for that. I'll keep that in mind.
She's calling her attorney right now.
There we go. All right. So with that, any other comments or thoughts for today?
My only comment is, and I know we're all in the same boat, but the sooner we get this stuff, the better, because again, as I stated early on, we're going to have to run this up the flagpole. And what I'm afraid of is we're going to have our meeting on the 19th and we won't be able to actually vote to, several of us probably won't be allowed to vote in favor because it hasn't been reviewed by the administration.
Okay, fair enough. I'll write this weekend.
The other thing is, in my suggestion, proposed revisions for private ways laws and proposed revisions for private road laws, I think that's the other one I had. What I did there was I went through what I had presented before, where I'd gone into all the reasons, and I basically just printed the statute with the suggested additions and deletions. And most of those, the ones that I did were the ones that I don't think are particularly controversial. I put controversial ones down towards the end where I said these are ones that we need to look at more. The ones at the beginning are, this is a simple change where it says private way. In this law, it means private road, and in this law, it means public easement. And if we can fix that terminology,
Okay.
that eliminate a lot of the confusion.
I'll look at those and, one thing that would help me, when I'm doing editing on this, I'm working in the Word world. And when you give me something in PDF, I have to convert it, which means that all of the spacing and formatting
Yeah,
goes to heck.
the reason I do that is because I have WordPerfect on my
Oh,
computer. And
now I
when I send
understand.
things in WordPerfect, nobody can open it.
I can't,
We have an old computer.
okay.
I may be able to find a way to convert it. to
If she
something
sends
else.
it to me, I do, the only thing I have that's updated is our Adobe. So I can translate it into Word for you and
Perfect.
send it. It might be, the margins might be off some
We
words,
can
might
work
be
with
skewed,
that.
but if you do that, then I can get it to Jim and it just makes it easier for him because otherwise he can't copy and paste.
That'd be
It's
super,
huge.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
I'm
I'm more
on
than
the,
willing to do that.
That's perfect.
I'm on the other end of it, which is I
Right,
can't take
yeah.
anything you
And I-
send me.
I don't mind being a translator because I actually have access to that. That's the one thing I do have access to.
All right.
Because
Well-
my other option is to paste it into the body of the email, and then it loses all of it.
Yeah, yeah. All right, I think we're all set then. We'll see you later this month. Thank you very much. Is there a motion to adjourn? Okay, all in favor? Thank you all.
Sounds a lot. I don't-
Berta, have you ever thought about going to the state prevalence auction?
We have been, yeah. And I have a laptop and computer that we got there, that has 3 or 4 stitches